Good morning, everyone. Scott Hamilton here, CEO of Executive Next Practice Institute. Welcome to this first of a series on innovation with our partner, Tech Coast Angels. Welcome to those of you joining us not only from Southern California, but from Europe. We see Mexico, we see Canada, and quite a few other countries joining us this morning. Thanks again for your time and in joining this terrific panel of people that we have coming up. This is quite an endeavor that's come together over several months. What you see displayed before you are representatives of both the startup community as well as the established enterprise community across not only Southern California, but across the entire United States. These representatives have a tremendous breadth of experience and depth of experience in innovation, both from the intrapreneurship side as well as the entrepreneurship side. And again, we're delighted to have them join us with their time and energy for contributing to this exploration of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. I've got to say something though, this is a virtual event and most of you have been subjected to Zoom and live stream events now for several months, since at least March, if not before. And I had to share this quote from Jerry Seinfeld that came out this past week when he talked about the virtual environment, where he says, energy, attitude, and personality cannot be remoted through even the best fiber optic lines. We're going to dispel that myth this morning. We've got quite an energetic group with a lot of energy, a lot of personality, and a lot of great insights. So we're going to prove Jerry wrong here this morning via this session. Okay, let's just talk about the baseline here. What is innovation all about? First of all, innovation itself is about executing an idea which achieves both value for both the company and the customer. That's what we're after here. And from that, we often look at how we can either explore new opportunities based on our current business model, or exploit new opportunities, new ideas in the marketplace. So we've got this portfolio map that we tend to do, whether we're a startup or whether an enterprise level company. We look at the entrepreneurial side of this, the traditional entrepreneur definition, and thank you, Lawrence Wilk, for this slide. It's the relentless pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources that are currently controlled. So it's this idea of kind of going for it, right? On the intrapreneurship side, we have people inside organizations both acting as a trustee to safeguard current resources, minimizing risk, but also looking to identify and pursue new opportunities. So we've got that balance. And again, our closing keynote today, Lawrence Wilk from UCI Mirage School, will really help us step forward from all the things that are discussed this morning with some practical solutions and practical next steps. In fact, all of our speakers today will be giving you very specific stories around how they are innovating across their organizations. So here's our agenda. This is going to move quick. Again, since this is a virtual conference, I know some of you will be coming in and out of the session, but we invite you to stay through the entire event. We invite you to participate. We're going to open with Dr. Sudek and Laura Kane to talk about their perspectives of innovation. First panel then will be moderated by Lisa Walker on strategies for innovation and execution. And then the enterprise view of connecting entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, led by the CEO of CEO Leadership Alliance, Doug Wilson. And then we'll have the closing keynote with Lawrence Wilk. Throughout this session, we're going to ask you to use the Q&A function on your Zoom. And most of you are familiar with that. Start giving us your questions now. Don't wait. Anything you have a question about, and if you want to send us a private chat, either to myself or to any of our panelists, feel free to do so. I want to particularly thank Stradling and Golden State Foods for stepping up and being title sponsors this morning. Stradling, of course, supports both E&P and Tech Coast Angels. And Golden State Foods is a tremendous community partner that gets involved with a number of endeavors, philanthropic efforts. And again, we are very pleased to have them with us this morning, Bob Wolpert representing GSF. Thank you also to our community partners who have made this event possible, who have helped get the word out about it. And these folks, again, are tremendous innovation ecosystem partners across Southern California. And I invite you to join them, follow them, get involved with their sessions and their activities. Thank you again to all of these partners. Now, I want to quickly bring up our partners in crime for the event this morning. David and Elko, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the invite. Ilko, great job and Scott, great job in putting this conference together. I'm very excited about this because it's one of the first times we actually bring together the startup community and the enterprise community. So this entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship are really two sides of the same coin, and they can kind of integrate with each other. I just want to introduce who TCA is. Most of you know who we are, especially in Southern California. We have a very simple mission, and that is to be the foremost place for entrepreneurs seeking seed capital and for angel investors looking for substantial returns on their investment. We have several strategies to do this. Number one, we develop and build relationships with various sources. These sources can include other angel groups with which we're associated. As you can look on the lower right-hand side, we're part of the Angel Syndication Network that actually Richard Sudak set up, which is great. We get a lot of deal flow through there, as well as deal flow through other entities within the ecosystem within Southern California, like Expert Dojo, Mucker Capital, COA Accelerator. There's a variety of them, too many to name. Number two, we want to develop events just like this and co-host events to acquire new members, and also to allow entrepreneurs to understand who we are and what we can do in providing seed capital for their ventures. Number three, we want to gain diversity with the addition of more women and minority investors. Thankfully, we have invested in several companies this year through the TCA Orange County Fund, and about half of them are women entrepreneurs, and that's very gratifying and great to hear. Number four, we want to continue to build the TCA brand to execute its mission. We want to help the entrepreneurs to do their job, to do better. We realize this is a long process. Many of the entrepreneurs we have seen before. They've come to us in prior times for funding, and we continue to fund them on successive ventures. TCA itself is one of the largest angel groups in the country with about 425 members, currently in 5 networks in Southern Cal. Some of them are virtual. So we've been doing the virtual meetings for about 3 years, or at least what we call hybrid meetings. In the first half of this year, we've invested $9.7 million in 31 companies. So we have the COVID-19, while it may have slowed down others, is not slowing down Tech Coast Angels. And we have 3 funds in TCA. We have a fund in San Diego, fund in LA, fund in OC. We overlap somewhat, but we also have distinct differences in what we invested. I hope you enjoyed this meeting today. Get what you can out of it. I'll write up what I find is some of the lessons learned or some of the output from the discussions today, and I'll post them through Executive Next Practices as well as Tech Coast Angels. Anyway, enjoy it, have fun, take care, be safe.
Thanks, David. Just a great partnership with TCA. We've thoroughly enjoyed this. A little bit about Executive Next Practice Institute. For those of you who don't know us, we've been around for over 11 years. It's a global organization of C-suite leaders, CEOs, and others representing all industry sectors. We tend to look at first look opportunities. That is, new opportunities in the marketplace, new concepts, new ways to build disciplines and cultures across the organization. And our drive is to create this idea of next practices. That is, moving you beyond the status quo. So a little bit about that. This is forum number 422 that we've done over the past 11 years, either workshops or forums or summits or private consultations with CEOs. And over 300 of those sessions have been partnered events like today's session with Tech Coast Angels. So we tend to play well with others, and we prefer that because it's a win-win for both organizations. We've had over 60,000 people flow through our network over the past 11 years. 80 plus countries are represented. So we do have a global presence and have been doing events in Europe, Asia Pac, as I mentioned, Mexico, Canada, various other locations. Finally, our membership is board, C-suite, and key leaders. And again, we invite you to join us. We have a full schedule going into the fall. You see pictured there one of the events in the old days of live events. We look forward to returning to those, particularly at UCI Beal Applied Innovation, which is our home here in Southern California. I also want to give a shout out to our strategy side of our business. This team has been nominated again to be Innovators of the Year by the Orange County Business Journal this year. And this is a group that's actively out there doing strategic retreats for businesses across the spectrum. All right. And of course, again, a thank you to our annual sponsors that have supported E&P over the years, and we welcome them as we move forward. Thanks again. Quick shout out also to our production team that's been responsible for this. Jason Duncan, CEO of Miller Farm Media, doing an outstanding job of formatting and displaying this event. Okay, so going back to innovation. Typically people look at it through one lens. They think of it as just M&A, or they think about it as a pure innovation. Rather, think about it in terms of multiple models. And again, Larry Wilk will talk about this later. Think about it as multiple models and channels and opportunities to partner with others as you innovate, particularly in a time of crisis. So there are multiple ways to do this. You see 4 boxes here, but if you drill into those boxes, there are probably another 20 to 30 separate opportunities for you to build and grow your business. So again, we've assembled these speakers so that you can look at all the frames of reference, all the various paths that you have going forward to innovate. So with that, I want to bring up our opening speaker, Dr. Richard Sudak. Just a little bit about Dr. Sudak. And by the way, you have your bios, the bios of all speakers were sent to you that are speaking today, the detailed bios. So we're just going to do kind of a flyby here, but I did want to let you know that Richard is Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Director of UCI Beal Applied Innovation here in Irvine. He was a founder of NADAC Computer Systems, which for data networking business, which was sold in 1999 to SAIC, a highly successful business. He served as an advisor to several MBA programs. He's been an active investor through direct investment and capital in angel funds for over 100 startup companies since 2000. He's chairman emeritus of Tech Coast Angels, TCA, so there's our crossover there. And Richard, just delightful for you to join us this morning, and we look forward to your opening comments. I'm going to open it up to Richard, and again, welcome.
Thank you very much, Scott. I just got to get my PowerPoint set up here, my bad. There we go. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm delighted to be here with E&P and of course TCA. So I appreciate this. What I thought I'd do is do a quick overview of what we do here for the community, especially the startup community. And then I have a few thoughts about the COVID crisis. So our mission is really help transform Orange County to become a globally recognized entrepreneur region. So we are built to really help the community. A little bit about UCI. This fiscal year, we just surpassed 500 million in research grants. We have we call 60,000 disruptors, about 36,000 students and 24,000 staff. Money Magazine has picked us as the #1 college in the U.S., and the New York Times has picked us as one of the colleges, the #1 college for doing the most for helping underserved students and under-resourced students. If you look at UCI's startups, they've raised about $13 billion and they've seen about $13 billion of exit value. The key here is that this value is 46% of that is in the last 3 years and about 63% in the last 5 years. So UCI is really contributing to the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Southern California. If you look at Beal Applied Innovation, we basically do 4 things. We handle all the intellectual property, basically the patents for UCI, the tech transfer function. We are the front door for industry engagement for companies who want to do sponsored research and work with the university. We support entrepreneurship across the campus. And again, we're here to really help build the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Orange County. And to that point, We built a space, a brand new space, in fact, that we can't be in at this point. But last year we had over 50,000 people through our building, over 90% non-UCI. So this is really designed and built for the community. These are mostly entrepreneur events, but E&P events and all kinds of different business events really for the community. I also want to mention to the entrepreneurs out there that we have someone dedicated, Luis Vasquez, who will help connect startups to investors, whether that's seed, angel, or VCs, Series A and above, for no fees, no commissions. Again, if you are looking for investment, reach out to myself or Luis, and we will try to connect you to different funding sources. So I thought I'd just show a few pictures since we cannot be in the building. Some of you, of course, have been in the building, but this is our new building that's really designed to be a state-of-the-art building to engage the community and entrepreneurs. This is the event space that we would have been in today if we could operate in the building. This is really designed to host different events for the community. This space is open to the public to rent and to use for events, and it all is designed with very high-tech ability to stream out and record, etc. This is our screening room for investment screenings. We have different casual meeting areas. This is our tiki bar. We have maker spaces and wet labs and areas, open areas for our startups. We have about 50 startups in the building, or would be currently today. We just opened up space on the 3rd floor, which will probably grow to well over 100 startups in the building. And these startups are not necessarily UCI startups. So I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID and about this crisis, and talk about the fact that this is a crisis, but it also might be an opportunity. And when I think about this conference is really, this topic is more important than ever. You know, many organizations will at best case lose ground on your competitors. At worst case, might not survive. However, there will be some who will be winners and be actually better off through this process. Obviously, COVID is a brutal wake up for all small and large businesses. I serve on the governor's Small Business and Innovative Startup Recovery Working Group, and the numbers are pretty gruesome on small businesses who are permanently closed or will be permanently closed. And of course, this crisis is very scary on many levels, both of course personal, but also in the business aspects. And as I said earlier, there will be winners and there will be losers. And some businesses really don't have many options. If you're an entertainment venue, not very many options, but however, most of you do have options, and this will be an inflection point for your business. So I think we're all asking a lot of questions here. You know, what do we think the supply chain will look like in the future? Were our disaster recovery plans adequate? How do we have to change those? Who can really work in the office and work out of the office? Who really wants to work out of the office? Who wants to be back in the office? Some do, some don't. However, I think the more difficult question to try to answer is it time to retreat to your core, or innovate, or both? And in some instances, retreating to your core and dropping ancillary products and services may be the best way to cut cost, streamline operations, maximize current profitability, or avoid losses, or at least minimize them. However, in some instances, the longer you wait to innovate, the more likely you are to lose ground to your competitors. The other option is, do you retreat to your core, but maybe create a hyper speed tiger team to maybe just focus on one thing so that you can come out of this better off than you were when you came in? And I think there's a lot of questions that we need to be asking ourselves. You know, our customer assumptions. What will customers want after the pandemic? How will our customer base be different? How is our internal culture, and how did that culture react to this crisis? Were you able to pivot quickly? I think that it's time for us to really challenge internally the status quo. And are we really set up to do that? Do we have an entrepreneurial mindset within the company that really allows us to think about how we have to change and how we have to morph? So many companies talk about being entrepreneurial, but often it's just talk, at least my experience. And really now is the time to self-assess that. And do we really allow out of the box thinking? Have we encouraged that? Do we support it? If not, you're probably poorly positioned to really react in the best way possible. It might be too late to shift to an entrepreneurial culture if you don't have one. If you do, it's time to pivot, to fail quickly, test, pivot, fail again, and find some success and some new opportunities. At least that's my perception. Although I want to talk about some positive things too. So, usually each crisis there's opportunity, and there are some organizations that end up better through this. I think if we look at our health system, I think telemedicine has been accelerated much quicker than it would have been. And in a lot of ways, telemedicine is helping through this pandemic. Now, telemedicine has some drawbacks, it has some positives, but it's forced payers to figure out how to pay for telemedicine and make this a usable practice. Some in the industry think that it's been accelerated maybe as much as a decade to get everyone on board with this. This could be a benefit of the crisis. Obviously, our supply chains were stressed beyond what we ever thought could happen. But they will be stronger after this. Most supply chains have survived and some have already become stronger. I think this is really important. I also think that this is a wake up to future pandemics. As I talk to different people in the healthcare systems, there are different types of flus, et cetera, that spread much easier actually than COVID does. So I think we'll be much better prepared and we'll respond quicker to any future ones that might happen. Another article I read said that the pandemic might save higher education. Universities are really being tested to look at how they deliver higher education and how they might have to or will need to deliver it in a more cost-effective way. It could change the landscape of universities over the next few years. Obviously, restaurants have been, or many at least, have been forced to go to curbside delivery, and it's something that they maybe did not offer before and will be better off through it. I wrote an article for the OCBJ recently about the angel investment industry and how, in some ways, this pandemic has helped move angels ahead a little bit. In the past, angels tended to just invest in companies locally, but because of the pandemic, we're all on Zoom now. We're having greater attendance to our screenings locally, but in our syndication efforts, we're finding more people attending. This is making it easier for entrepreneurs to present to multiple angel groups across the country, especially across the West. And this is allowing larger rounds to be funded quicker. And if you ask an entrepreneur, every angel group moves slower than they'd like. And so this is really helping the angel industry in a lot of ways. And on a more human level, I think that this crisis has helped us all be a little more empathetic in a lot of different ways. But I want to share one example. Now, this is a bit of a trivial example, but in my small business, when I was in business just, a few years in, I started a computer consulting firm with $250 when I was 24, made every mistake in small business, used credit cards to make payroll, et cetera. So I had to learn a lot on the job. But a few years in, I ran into a serious cash flow crisis. I had my credit lines maxed. I had no more cash available. And it was really an inflection point of life or death. And so I did not know what to do and realized that my business was consulting, and so most of my revenue was through billable hours. So we would typically bill for services, be on net 30, et cetera. And of course, with billable services, there's often delays in getting paid. So I had to come up with what we call the prepaid contract to survive. And that simply meant you could buy a block of hours at a discount and pay for them in advance. Again, a very trivial thing. Well, it turned out that many companies liked prepaid rather than being billed because they could pay one invoice. It was administratively easier for them. And it turned out large companies actually wanted to buy much bigger prepaid because they found processing one invoice was much easier than a number of smaller bills. And it turned out that this was something our customers wanted that we had no idea. We would have never come up with unless we had this crisis. And it turned out that we shifted about 80% of our consulting revenue to prepaid, which over time really transformed our business and gave us a much stronger position because of cash flow going away as a problem, but also being advantaged to having that cash up front. So in ending, I thought I would leave with two thoughts. So first of all, if you look at these companies here on the screen, all these are massive companies. And you might ask, well, what's so special about these? All these companies were started during a recession. So although these are difficult times, this is also a time of opportunity. And I think we should all think about how are we going to innovate through this. I know in a lot of ways we're just trying to survive, but we need to be thinking about how we innovate through this. So when we come out the other side, we're stronger. It's now at a point where it's not about survival. It's about where are we at on the other side. So again, Scott, thank you for this opportunity to talk. This looks like a great conference lineup. So we're excited to be part of this, and I'll turn it back to you.
And now we will learn some real life examples from our innovation panel that will be moderated by Lisa Walker. Lisa is the Vice President of Tech Coast Angels, responsible for deal flow. She's an entrepreneur herself, and her career includes leading 2 businesses to acquisition, guiding and mentoring startups, turnarounds, and larger organizations through growth to profitability. Her focus is in technology and aviation industries. Lisa holds 8 world records and many national championship medals in formation skydiving. She's an instrument-rated private pilot, a marathon runner, and an advanced scuba diver. Lisa will fearlessly get the best out of this very diversified and highly experienced innovation panel. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Ilko, very much. Excited about this panel. We've got a fantastic group of people, and we're going to be exploring next practices in innovation and hearing, I think, many great, fascinating stories about their experiences. So I'm going to first just very quickly run through everybody's intro, and then we'll dive right into the questions. So in no particular order, first I want to introduce Linda DeMario. I've known Linda for many years as Executive VP of the Greater Irvine Chamber of Commerce. Linda helps lead the most influential chamber in Orange County. Their focus on economic development encompasses business attraction and retention, startups, and innovation ecosystem, workforce development, tourism initiatives designed to help businesses in Orange County grow. Linda's on the board of directors and a mission specialist for the International Economic Development Council and the board of directors for Octane, one of Orange County's leading incubator organizations. And something I didn't know about Linda is that she's a Vietnam War era Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service, Linda. Next up, we have Jeff Earl, a CEO, coach, and strategic advisor. Jeff has held numerous C-level positions during his 30-year career that spans across startups, privately held and large public organizations, including ADP, Western Digital, Northrop Grumman, and others, and most recently as CEO of mobile game developer Mobilityware and COO of a fintech startup called Blast. Jeff has experience in everything from mobile apps to gaming, automotive, consumer electronics, healthcare, software, hardware, data analytics, SaaS, cloud computing, business intelligence, AI, and machine learning. Basically, Jeff knows everything. Next, we have Garrett Brown, founder of A18 and an adjunct professor of entrepreneurialism at USC and a former CRO of Bidium. Garrett is an entrepreneur at heart. After beginning his career as a corporate lawyer representing entrepreneurs, he decided it would be way more fun on the inside and joined a tech startup to experience the excitement for himself. At Fast Point Games, an online branded game platform, he ran the company's sales and business development efforts until it was acquired. He then helped launch and scale Bidium as an enterprise software company where he served as chief revenue officer until they were acquired by Google. Garrett's superpower is the ability to build, scale, and inspire sales teams. We also have with us today Aaron Wong. Aaron is a co-founder and chief brand officer at Super 73. Founded in 2016 in Southern California, Super 73 has led the charge in pioneering a new approach to help redefine the electric motorbike industry. Born from the desire to inspire and create adventure and community, Super 73 is an American lifestyle adventure brand fusing motorcycle heritage and youth culture. Truly innovative. Aaron is a true entrepreneur who is out there creating a new brand category. Next up is Dr. Dina Brown. Dina is a diversity, inclusion, and career strategist. Dr. Brown is a certified John Maxwell speaker, teacher, and behavioral consultant with a purpose and passion for helping individuals, leaders, and organizations connect the dots between their core values and transformative leadership for the 21st century and beyond. She has deep experience in organizational development, executive coaching, organizational change and transformation, and leadership development. She also serves on the board of advisory for Executive X practices. Something I didn't know about Dina is that she received her undergrad degree from my alma mater, San Diego State University. So I have something in common with a brilliant person. It doesn't happen every day. And last but not least, Carrie Ransom is joining us. Carrie is founder and president OC4 Venture Studios and founder of Accelerate OC. Carrie is a serial entrepreneur and investor. His extensive experience covers the entire range from startup to through explosive growth. And having sold the company, he ran as CEO to a public company. As founder and president of OC4, he and his team are on the lookout for entrepreneurs with grit who are building innovative companies. In all of their portfolio companies, they invest their own capital and leverage their team's capabilities as senior executives to build amazing companies together. Carrie's superpower is venture capital with a heart. So that is the quick introductions. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and we will dive right into the questions. I will call out a person specifically for each of the questions so that we're not, there's not confusion or hesitation, but if anyone else, has some good story or something that they'd like to chime in, please feel free to do that. So let's start out from more of a big picture perspective. Linda, most businesses in the area took a hit from COVID-19. What sectors here and across the country were hit hardest, and why do you think that is?
Thanks, Lisa, and I so appreciate being invited to join this prestigious panel. Good morning, everyone. Here, as well as across the country, the #1 casualty of COVID-19 has been the hospitality and tourism industries writ large. That includes restaurant, retail, hotels, attractions, theme parks, event venues. It just has been extraordinary. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. In Irvine, we usually run 80% occupancy in our hotels year round, and now we are barely cracking 35%. It is like that across the country with very few exceptions. And so as a consequence, the cascading effect of that, the jobs that have been lost, I mean, that sector lost the most jobs across the country, no question about it. And whether they will be returned in those numbers, it's pure speculation, but my guess would be no, that we will never be able to recover the same level of jobs, and that the tourism industry, hospitality, again, large scope, will not really return to its current level before COVID-19 until about 2 years from now. So it's going to be a very slow recovery. Some of the other industry sectors that have gotten hit very hard were obviously transportation. And that includes the airlines, you know, trains, cruise ships, anything to do with transportation. And that also includes the auto industry as well, you know, because as this lingers on, you know, new car sales are down. The other thing is oil and gas. We've all been watching that. I mean, that was in sort of a state of suspension to begin with. And now it's even more chronic given the fact that so many more people are working from home. Myself, an example, I used to have a 45-minute commute. That gas station saw me once a week. Now they're seeing me once every 2 months. So I rest my case. The other one, industry sector, is sports. Personally, I'm going through withdrawal. I'm having a real tough time without my sports. And but when you think about the amount of money that's being lost across the board, that's incredible. And then last but not least is all the personal services. Again, cascading effect: the dry cleaner, the launderer, the dog walker, you know, nails, barbershops, hair, what else did I came up with? You know, gyms, car wash, you know, all of these things that we just built into our usual daily activities. So those are those sectors that have been hit the hardest. And some of them will snap back like personal services, but some of them will take a very long time to recover.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I haven't had my nails done since February, so.
Don't even get me going.
So, Linda, you know, it's hard to imagine being prepared for something like this, but you know, what do you think this catastrophic event revealed about some of these businesses and their actual, you know, state of readiness for a major disruption? Because they do come, right? We just don't know when and where and what they're going to look like.
Yeah. When I look at this panel and I look at the audience that we're speaking to, I think you'll appreciate we have intentional disruption, where we literally set about disrupting, you know, some vertical or some industry. And then there's unintentional. And the unintentional is the man-made or natural catastrophic events or actions that are going to slow commerce or the conduct of business. And in this case, what we learned very early on in communicating with our 20,000 businesses in Irvine, and then communicating with my colleagues across the country. Most small businesses are not even ready for a water main break. That's how unprepared we discovered our companies were, whether it was a one-person company, sole proprietor, or whether it was a small company of 2 to 3 people or under 10, or quite frankly, we talked to companies that were, you know, 250 or more employees. And when the chips were down, they could not locate some of the most important and essential information to help them respond in a timely fashion, much less recover. And what we learned was, as we put this list together, because the Chamber hopes to do something about it, we found out that there were a great many companies that didn't even have the basics of bookkeeping down. They could not put their hands on their payroll. Okay, they didn't know how to call EDD. They didn't know how to properly lay off or furlough people. They didn't know how to close down their business properly. They didn't have a relationship with their banker in any way, shape, or form. So when EIDL and PPP came available, and PPP was one of the loans that you went through your bank, they were on the outside looking in. No line of credits established. Very few had any kind of reserves whatsoever. No emergency preparedness plan. In other words, they didn't even have some place where they could go for emergency numbers. They had no way, they didn't even know whether they had a city business license until they found out they weren't getting our alerts and emails. We also ran into two things that were quite staggering to me. One was we still have existing language barriers in and around Southern California, most assuredly.
Yeah.
Where we had these business owners that
Looks like Linda's breaking up a little bit. I don't know if she is for the rest of you. Okay. Okay. Let's go to another question. Let's see. So some of the greatest innovations are born out of similar types of disruptions. How can businesses use the pandemic to pivot, innovate, and find new ways of doing business? Garrett, how about that question?
Yeah, you know, I've been called by people who know me, I've been called a pathological optimist, and I don't necessarily think that they meant it as a compliment at the time, but you know, I look at what's going on and everything that Linda was saying is true, that, you know, especially with those industries, there's been a lot of struggle, but I do think that if you look at industries like tech, it kind of revealed that they were surprisingly ready, at least for the, you know, the move home and the change in how business works now. You know, there's been a lot of talk about how this is the cloud's big moment and they've accelerated 10 years in the last 3 months and all that good stuff. And I think that really is true. I'm seeing some friends. I've got a friend who owns one of the largest or fastest growing marketing agencies. It's global. And he announced a couple of weeks ago that they are never going back to their physical offices. They're going to, from now on, they're going to be virtual, and they've started hiring across the world, and they're hiring the best candidates now instead of the, you know, just people that can come into an office. So I think those types of changes actually have revealed that things are really good. And so I think, from, you know, moving forward, that stuff, hopefully entrepreneurs will start to figure out ways to expand those types of advantages to all these other industries that are depressed and that are having issues. But I think, you know, moving forward, that's something that's exciting and something positive that's come out of this.
Yeah, there are a lot of technology companies sort of going, okay, this is the disruption we've been waiting for for a long time. And yeah, so that's been great. So Garrett, what are the characteristics of a successful head of a new business or new product? And is there a difference between whether you're identifying them as an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur? And Jeff, you can also weigh on this question.
Yeah, there's the obvious stuff. There's the curiosity, and there's the hard work, and there's the persistence, and everybody kind of already knows that stuff. So I think about it and I think, okay, for a panel like this, what are some things that people maybe wouldn't think of that are characteristics of successful heads of businesses, successful intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs? The two that jump to mind for me, the first one would be just authenticity. I see a lot of people that I work with, clients who they feel like they kind of have to fake it and they have to be a certain way. They have to be an extrovert. They have to pretend they have all the answers. And what we typically find is that it's okay not to have all the answers. That lets, you know, being able to say, I don't know, lets you become a teammate, and you can go up to your potential clients and you can say, let's figure this out together. Let's get on the same page. Let's find the answers together. And investors and potential customers and potential early employees, they all gravitate towards that kind of authenticity. And then the second thing I thought of, and this is, people who know me will laugh because I'm always taking a sales angle because that's my favorite subject, but the ability to sell. It's really easy to pretend that you can keep pushing off sales and just focus on product or operations or process or whatever it is that you happen to be passionate about. But at the end of the day, in order to have a business that's going to allow you to help customers, to employ people, you're going to have to, you know, get people to spend some money. And so the most successful people that we see in our business that we work with, they're the ones that get really comfortable with selling really early on, that make it part of the culture, that make sales an extension of every other department in the company and vice versa, and really embrace it. So that's kind of the things that jump to mind for me. And then certainly there are differences between entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs. I would argue that the entrepreneurs have more existential things to deal with. But in general, I think they're really similar.
Yeah. Those answers really track, I think, with my experience with TCA in terms of the pitches that we hear. If we our listening to somebody who seems like a know-it-all and not really coachable or open, and lacks authenticity, it's a negative thing. And the other big issue we often find is a lack of paying any attention to the marketing and sales aspect of it, which is a challenge. Jeff, what are your thoughts about the question?
That's great stuff, Garrett. I agree on the entrepreneur side. I'll probably move more towards the intrapreneur side. I've done quite a bit more of those in my career. Scott had a really good slide in his opening discussion around being trustee or promoter. And I think that's a key difference. Entrepreneurially, definitely the promoter, you're the number one promoter in your company, whether it's externally with clients, new clients, product development, funding sources, obviously, and then your own team. When you're doing intrapreneurial opportunities, you are the trustee. You are managing resources that are likely funded and or owned by the parent company. Whether you're in the building or out of the building, I like to say that out of the box is best done out of the building. So it's always good advice to get untethered from the parent company. But as the trustee, you're dealing in a much more peer-to-peer environment. You're working with other stakeholders within the parent company, whether it's the CEO and CFO who have invested in you, or VP or CIO of IT, those kinds of things where you have to have influence without authority. You have to get them to do things you need and want, even though they might not have skin in the game. They might not even care about your particular revenue, your success, your products, your people. And getting them to care, and that level of being a trustee with those resources that you're borrowing or using from them, I think is a key piece. So that last part, influence without authority, which you don't really have as an entrepreneur. You have some, again, with your stakeholders, but that side to side, peer to peer capability is a clear need.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of my my early career was in product management, which was basically getting a whole bunch of people that don't work for you to do what you want them to do. It's a great background to have. Thank you. So let's see, Jeff, let's keep going with you. What makes for a successful intrapreneur?
I probably hit on the key part. So intrapreneur, you've got to be very business focused. Not that you don't as an entrepreneur, but as an entrepreneur, you tend to be more product focused, right? The key thing is figuring out product market fit, figuring out your go-to-market strategy. It's a different kind of leadership, and again, more product, and then selling that product, getting traction. Will the dogs eat the dog food, as you've heard, those kinds of things. When you're an intrapreneur, there's a lot more business componentry to it. Again, HR and IT, financial acumen, reporting back up to the board or the CEO, who are really your investors, is more detailed, it's more formal, it's more structured. And I don't mean those things as good things necessarily. And when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have to worry about that overhang of formality and structure that, working inside a larger entity asks for. So I think kind of, I won't call it more well-rounded, but you've got to worry about, in the beginning, about a more vast level of, again, stakeholders and things and business capabilities, rather than being like super product focused when you're a startup, because without the product and then obviously the team and the people, you don't have anything. And it's sort of the opposite with entrepreneurship.
And is there, what are there differences between having cash and non-cash resources?
Huge, yes. As I mentioned, the infrastructure. So when I did a spin out of Western Digital way back when, we were actually a software company trying to be spun out of a notoriously large hardware company. And until we got the product figured out, I was able to use all of our servers, our email system, payroll system, all those things. And I really didn't have to pay for any of them. I even got office space, on and on. Where as an entrepreneur, you've got to worry about finding those things, paying for those things, managing them. Do you do just basic stuff and get your free Gmail accounts for your team? Or do you have this enterprise server with, Microsoft Outlook, et cetera? So very different angle.
for sure. Okay, and let's, Linda, welcome back. I know you got a little bit cut off there, so I wanted to come back and ask you about what do you recommend in terms of entrepreneurs, startups and early stage companies do better, or smaller companies, I think you mentioned, to prepare themselves and their employees for the next disruption?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. I'm sorry I was of L for a while. I do want to share one part about my career that I think has some bearing on this. And that is that I have served in the capacity of sort of an emergency cleanup crew for the International Economic Development Council. And I also had a consulting practice. So I have been sent in after hurricanes, after tornadoes, after really in tough spots to help communities, counties, sometimes work with states. In my consulting practice, I really put that to work. And for example, whether it was Dayton, Ohio, that was just reeling from National Cash Register moving to Atlanta, or whether it was Fremont, Nebraska, I was trying to figure out how to save their dying, downtown, or just New Orleans after the Gulf oil spill. The advice I'm going to share is across the board. It is literally good for whether you are a sole proprietor or whether you are a cast of thousands, okay? This is the time when what you need to do is make sure that you do have a sound business plan in place, not a 3 or 5 year strategic plan. I'm not proposing that because I think that's a relatively foolish investment at this point, but a basic business plan, that's got the 7 or 8 featured essential elements in it. Who are you? What's your plan of action? What's your product and service look like? What's your organization look like? The basic fundamental plan that you can turn to when your back's against the wall. Your accounting, your payroll, all of those operational details, which we tend to take for granted. And as I just shared with you, we were woefully lacking in when the chips were down. The second thing is take time to assemble the resources that you'll need when your company is in danger, when your company needs to respond to whether it's an intentional or unintentional disruption or man-made or natural disaster. And that means assemble the resources. For example, your Chamber of Commerce is a good example. Most companies don't even think about that. The people, I spent time with hundreds of businesses that had no idea what the Chamber was. Well, we had one of the best resource websites up within 48 hours. And, so make it easy on yourself. Get those resources in order. Understand where your emergency numbers are. All of the, addresses of the people that you need to contact for help. Understand your deficiencies and either correct them or hire for them. But get all that stuff, up and out now. The third thing is capitalization. Again, restaurants usually are operating with less than 30 days of reserves. But for goodness sake, have options. Whether it's a line of credit, whether it's a relationship with a bank, whether it's knowing who to see at SBA, or friends and family, back to nature. But make sure that you have some options in your back pocket so you're not caught cold. The fourth thing I recommend is think the unimaginable. Run the what if scenario. What if my product or service is suddenly rendered obsolete, irrelevant, unable to be delivered? Okay, what are your options? What will you look like tomorrow? That is a very tough assignment, but it can also be very exhilarating and very satisfying because as an entrepreneur, you are going to now have at your disposal some options and solutions that are going to cause you to feel less anxiety ridden when something like this happens in the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Linda. All right, Erin, what are your thoughts on what makes for a successful entrepreneur?
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for TCA for putting on this event and including us. So I guess I'm really only on my second startup. I'm pretty green, so I really appreciate you including me in this panel. But this is the second startup that I've been a part of. And for us, I think entrepreneurship has a very clear set of values that we have to be able to portray to the rest of the organization, and really at the heart of it for us, it's just having fun. And we come from a design and engineering background, so having a very clear value set to start at is at the forefront is innovation. So we love designing stuff, we love building stuff, and the company that we are currently on right now is Super 73. That actually started as an accident, and it was a pivot from our previous company. So very similar to how Linda was speaking about being ready. So we were ready. I think we were just too early in our last startup. We were trying to electrify cargo scooters, if you will. And at the time, it was 2012 or 2013. It was the electric tech just wasn't ready yet. So we had to pivot, and in 2016 we built a consumer vehicle that we launched on Kickstarter, and really it was kind of for fun. We only wanted to build about 20 to 25 units or so, and we ended up getting about 800 orders in about 30 days. So long story short, my business partners and I at the time had to liquidate all of our other businesses and know that we had something lightning in a bottle, if you will, and move very quickly. This was right after the hoverboards had just come off of their apex, and I think the shared scooter platform was starting to take off a little bit, and private ownership of electric light vehicles was still an opportunity. So we got a little bit of a first mover's advantage. And our approach to that was to take a lifestyle aspect and a brand play towards it. And it really was because of just what we were passionate about. I was really passionate about lifestyle and entertainment and fashion and music. And my other business partner was very interested in Star Wars and viral content and media. So we were able to take those two worlds that we came from and really fuse it into our brand and our company. And it just hit a tone, very similar to how Garrett was explaining how important it was to be authentic, because there was another paradigm shift happening in our industry, which was the dealership model and e-bikes was kind of collapsing. So we had to go direct. 90% of our business is direct. And because of that, we were forced to communicate with our end consumers. That ended up having to be the best thing that could have happened to us, because we were able to communicate in our voice, our authenticity. And now, we just passed our 4-year mark here. I think we're in over 20 countries now, and we have a very passionate rider base of young, enthusiastic riders. This is unique because the motorcycle industry has taken a hit in the past couple of years, and to get a new group of riders in has been a challenge for sure. So yeah, bringing that all back into for the entrepreneurship question, and even segueing a little bit into there was an innovation question. We get a lot of our innovation actually from our community and internally as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's talk about teams a little bit. Is there a difference? Let's see, let's ask Carrie to address this question. Is there a difference in the types of teams you put together as an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur?
I think, and thank you, Lisa. I mean, one just quick follow-up to Aaron's last set of comments. I think a couple traits that he really hit on that I would say are particularly important for an entrepreneur are adaptability and awareness. And clearly, I think you exemplify those through how you just described what's happened at your company, is adapting to the opportunity and being aware of what's going on to see that, and also to continue to be with your customers. So I commend you for that, but I think that's a very good story for others to be very attentive to as well. With regard to your question about teams, I would say the general answer at the seminal stages, whether it's an entrepreneur or intrapreneur, it's probably fairly similar. But as Jeff talked about earlier, depending on what resources you have available to you also could influence what the team looks like. And it really, from our perspective, how we think about building early companies, you need the key value that you're going to deliver to the world in that early team. So depending on what the value is that you're really trying to deliver, that solution to a problem worth solving, the early team should be centered around that. And anything that's not probably contributing to determining that value, creating that value, or distributing that value to the market is probably distraction and noise. And so I don't, necessarily want to prescribe exactly what that team needs to look like, because it depends on what that value that you're really trying to create is. But usually, I'm a pretty, those of you that know me, which a lot of friends on here, I'm a pretty simple guy, and you usually need somebody that's building it, somebody that's selling it, and then ideally eventually somebody who's going to count it too. But I would tend to start with the building and the selling aspects.
Yeah, thank you. So let's go to Dr. Dina Brown and talk about, if you would, what role does diversity play in driving innovation?
Well, diversity plays a huge role in driving innovation. And what I like to call the I factor is that there takes an intentionality. I just want to tap into real quickly to the difference in the types of teams that you make, because that's going to lead into me expanding on diversity and inclusion as far as building teams. And so I want to share with you Harvard's Business Review. I love their definition of how they define a team. Is that a team is a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, set of performance goals, and approach to which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Implicitly implies that there's diversity there, but we also know that that often does not actually happen. And if you have a bunch of hammers, all you're going to see and everything's going to look like a nail. And so that concept of diversity, and when we speak about diversity, I want to make sure that I'm framing my responses so that you see the expansion of it. I'm not talking about diversity solely in looks and culture. I'm talking about cognitive dissonance, diversity in thought, so that you are not tied down to groupthink. Because if you want innovation, you're going to actually have to have cognitive dissonance. You're going to have someone that's striking the nerve to say, how else are we going to do that? And I wanted to, again, applaud, Aaron, and what your company's been able to do, because when we think about building, again, diversity and inclusion, even in the market space, is that what you heard throughout this morning is about the different pivots organizations and companies need to make, whether it's a market pivot, a methods pivot, a process pivot. But what I want to speak to as I go into explaining more about the diversity and inclusion part is the experience pivot, because that is the bread and butter to your buyer's journey. And so what Garrett was saying about getting to the point of sales, it's how are we going to make sure that the experience is such that we stay, not only if we're talking about entrepreneurship and obtaining and retaining top talent and actually empowering people within the organization to be entrepreneurial, but we have to look at the experience that we create. And when we talk about the difference between culture and climate is something that can change like the weather. We have a birthday party right now, so everybody's happy. There's a lot of energy flowing, but really the culture is the foundation to that. So we have to begin to take a look at that. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you to what I call the I factor. And so the very first thing to do that, we have to inventory who and what do we have on our team right now? Honestly, who do we have? What is the authentic, traits, skill sets, abilities of the knowledge that they have right now on our team? So we take that inventory. And once we've taken inventory, we now move to the next I, and we identify the gaps. And what I like to call, there's three particular gaps that we have, whether there's a knowledge gap, whether there's a perception gap, or there's an experience gap. And so then how do we, again, intentionally begin to build our teams around that? And so now we have a purpose to why we're building the teams, and that diversity that we have now on our team, again, depending on that need, is really going to be powerful. So now we can intentionally implement, and now we will see, innovative processes. And so one of the things that I read across, I was doing some reading, and I came across, there's a little story, and I want to share this with you about a professor and a farmer that will kind of hit home to this. is particularly when we talk about the knowledge gap. And so professor and farmer are traveling across the nation on a train. They've talked for days. And finally the professor says, you know, I'm kind of tired. Why don't we play a little game of riddles? And so the farmer agrees. He said, yes, okay, that sounds fantastic. And so again, the professor says, how about this? We'll each give each other a riddle. And if each one of us misses the riddle, then we will pay each other $1. And the farmer says, you're way smarter than I am. How about I pay you 50 cents? Because of course you know more than I do. And the professor actually agrees. And so the farmer says, I'll create the first riddle. And so he did. He says, what has 3 legs walking and 2 legs flying? And the professor says, well, I don't know. And so he paid the farmer $1. And the farmer says, well, I don't know either. So then the farmer gave the professor 50 cents. And so here, as we are talking about, you know, what do we have in that diversity of thought? So whether we're talking about academically, spiritually, whatever that is, when we're building diverse and inclusive teams, is that's what really helps us begin to think outside the box and then innovate. And then one other point that I want to talk to when we talked about what's the difference between intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial, and how do we create that entrepreneurial spirit entrepreneurially, is that we have to look at those risk and reward factors. And if we truly empower people within our organizations, and when we get to see that, and we've set the cultural foundation, which was spoken about earlier, and now we have this sense of autonomy. And what I want to offer when we talk about autonomy is what I call the 10-80-10 rule. Is that in the beginning, that 10%, I kind of help guide you because I want to make sure that it's aligned to our mission, vision, and values. And then 80% go off, do it. You know, you are empowered. And then that 10, the last 10 is we come back and then I can kind of check in with you to see how it's working. And that you give people the opportunity to, again, give them a new idea or let them to implement a new idea. And when doing that, you give them the opportunity to take risk without it being punitive. And so that you kind of, they'll create a system in that for your own assurance. And then the fourth thing was talked about was resources. I can't be entrepreneurial if I have to fight for every single opportunity or thing that I need to actually build, you know, what I want to build inside the company. And so that's why a lot of entrepreneurs, they get frustrated and they leave. They go, I could just might as well do this on my own, you know, and I might as well bootstrap it or get my neighbors, put it on my credit card, because if I'm going to have to fight for a company to let me do something great inside, I'm going to take this idea, you know, elsewhere. And so when we talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, I'm going to say that it's the utmost importance, because one of my favorite people, Eric McNulty, and he's the director of research at the National Preparedness Leadership Institute. And we're talking about people in this, people in the processes. So it's not just about systems, it's about people. And that mechanical systems may be linear, but as soon as the human element is incorporated into that, you now have a very complex and adaptive system, and you're going to need to have creativity and diversity to actually innovate.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, let's see, as an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, what are the landmines that that you need to avoid? Let's have anybody who wants, Carrie or Aaron or Garrett, jump in on that. Okay, Carrie.
What are the landmines?
What are the landmines?
I mean, I feel like the you know, some of the biggest ones are, and I think Dean even mentioned this with this notion of a hammer, is falling in love with your idea and your solution, and not allowing the customer or the market to really help you understand what you really should be doing. And so to me, that's often one of the biggest landmines that I see. And then I would say a second one, there's particularly a group, and I think this can happen intrapreneurially with somebody who's really convincing or good at selling, and entrepreneurially the same way, that they get some validation from people that aren't necessarily customers, but could be investors. And I often have to counsel entrepreneurs that just getting some capital from friends and family or others isn't necessarily a sign that you're exactly on the right track. That could just be you're really charismatic and good, And so I think in those early stages, you have to just find some ways to counterbalance and keep yourself honest and accountable. And I see a lot of people, I call it wandering the desert, a lot of people out wandering the desert for extended periods of time because of too much love for their solution or feeling like they have validation when they really don't. So those would be a couple of landmines that I'd offer up.
Yeah, great, thank you. Aaron, what are some landmines that in your experience and that you've run into?
I would say maybe egos. It's a big one.
Yeah.
You know, in our experience, any kind of external pressure, if your executive team is united and if you have a united board, it's hard for that to penetrate into the organization. But any small internal fissure, that's a recipe for disaster if we don't address that very quickly. So yeah, for us, it's really contributing to the greater good, and you know, we're passionate about moving the entire company forward, and it's a we mentality, and so yeah, for us, there's no place in our organization for any kind of egos, and that's probably the biggest landmine.
Yeah, great, thank you. Anybody have anything else to add on that question?
I'll just throw
oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead, Jeff.
real quick, is managing expectations, especially internally, the speed at which you can create innovation in a larger company and how fast they want to see results and all that. And then obviously as an entrepreneur, you have to do the same thing with your investors, right? They all want the return, they want the exit, they want traction immediately. So I'd say that's one of the scarier areas that I would say.
Yeah, they're going to be pushing you for different things than you should be doing. Linda?
Yeah, and Lisa, I just wanted to contribute, having, been fortunate enough to, observe hundreds of pitch sessions, but also interviewing, UK life science companies for expansion. One of the universal comments that are made is always a thread you're hearing here. It's beyond ego, though. It's what some of the things that we've discovered is that they cannot articulate their product or service. They literally cannot articulate. They cannot communicate their solution or what problem they're solving in the most, and again, in the most fundamental way. And so if you can't do that, that's how salespeople end up getting sent as the front people. And that's not altogether a good thing. So we counsel, coach the founder or co-founder to the point where
Okay, looks like Linda's having issues again. Garrett, what was your contribution?
Yeah, one that I've been seeing a lot lately, a mistake that I've been seeing or a potential landmine, is mistaking a mile marker for a finish line. So you see so many entrepreneurs, especially young ones, early ones, where they think, if I just raise money, or if I just release this feature, if I just hire a VP of sales, or whatever, that kind of what they start to view as a finish line, but it's really just a mile marker. And so making sure that the eye is on whatever the prize of the moment should be, instead of what are not distractions, is not the right word, but not the actual end game. I think that's a really important one.
That's a huge one. And I think, similar to that too, Garrett, is so many who believe all I need is a little more money. And that's one that we run into very often. That is, if I just had the capital, all will be fine. And a lot of the conversations I have every day are, I know you don't have it all figured out. You know you don't have it all figured out. Let's talk about the process by which you're going to go figure it out, the learning process. That's what I want to really get clear on, because capital may absolutely not be even what you need at this point, right? So that's a landmine that I think a lot, because it's if they do raise the capital and they don't solve the next stage, then it's just going to be dilution. It's expensive money to and raise as an entrepreneur, as we know.
Okay, I want to make sure we are staying on time. Dina, did you have something you wanted to add to that question?
When I was listening, not so particularly to that question, but I love what you were talking about, like the ego piece. And I think that's across the board, because that lends itself to being able to be authentic. And one thing I put in the chat is that I always counsel to don't let your ego get in the way of your excellence. And that's for leaders and for employees. That's for every single person in life and leadership, because you can't separate your life from your leadership. And authentically how you show up and what you do in the dark is really what people are going to see in the light. And so you really have to deal with that ego factor.
Great, great advice.
Don't let your ego be your amigo.
Good way to remember it. Scott, do we have any questions from the audience that you would like the panel to address? You're muted, Scott. If you're, nope, still muted. All right. I don't see any open questions.
Yep, can you hear me?
There he is.
Yeah. Just a couple of, we've had some questions, but I want to throw this to David and Elko for a moment. Did you have a couple of questions before we move on to our next panel?
Yeah, I have a comment. I think the point on ego and looking at, you know, the end game is really critical. One of the things that I find as a landmine is not reinforcing the clarity of the goal every time the team meets. One of the things you sometimes, what I always taught the team members is, here's the goal, here's what we want to do, are we all in line? And asking positively if they have, you know, if they all agree. Because if they don't all agree, you have a different problem in getting this formation and performance. So I don't have any specific questions. That was just my comment, but you know, I took copious notes. The landmine discussion was really excellent. Well done.
Yeah, I've got to echo what you're saying too, David. And I want to go back to what several said, including Carrie, about the being necessary to be simple. Keep it simple, build from the start around the sales, around the customer, and also build your design so you automatically, to Dina's point, you automatically include people in the discussion about how the company goes forward. What's the shared sense of purpose from day one? Because the larger you grow, the more challenging it is to tap the collective intelligence. This was an outstanding panel. Lisa.
Here's one other quick question came up. I mean, this is an interesting question by Karen. How do you draw the line between, you know, you have a real disruptive technology and you don't have the real thing until somebody says you have the real thing? I mean, this goes back to the question of falling, or the point that was raised of falling in love with the idea. How do you really know it's disruptive? Anyone want to take that? By the way, I do not have an answer.
Well, when you said that, I actually, my first inclination is thinking, why do you care? Is it this disrupted? Does it solve a problem? Does it actually help? So are you being disruptive for the sake of being disruptive? Or are you trying to solve a problem and be the solution? And I think that when we reframe as to what we are addressing, then we don't really get caught in those weeds. We are steadily looking at really how are we really adding value? And so we can spend that time. And so you kind of lend itself, and there's going to take maybe several iterations of that to do that. So instead of looking at, because I know people who will do things just to create disruption, and yet it fails. So why don't we do it to solve a problem and be a solution, and we keep reiterating it until it solves a solution, and that we fill in whatever gap in the market is there.
And let me counter that with a different point of view as being an engineer. Most of the great advances in the world were due to disruptive technology without a solution in mind. Mm-hmm. So the question for many of the entrepreneurs is putting the effort in to try to shape the market for that solution. Do people really know this is a solution? I mean, think about, you know, Art Fry at 3M. And Art Fry at 3M had no one had the question, I needed a peelable, non-sticky glue. And look what Post-it notes is today. You know, or look at Bell Labs, or look at some of the, or Watson, or take a look at Google, take a look at what they're trying to work on. They're trying to come up with, you know, with technologies, with areas where there may not be a solution. I think the issue is the balance.
But David, you know, you're one of my favorite people, because even what you just proved my point, they're filling the gap. They're saying there's a gap.
They don't know if there's the gap. That's the point.
This is why you need a diverse team.
Yes.
This is exactly the argument for diversity of thought and team. I mean, this is why you have these huge chasms between inventors of disruptive technology and commercial market products. And you need those diversity of thought and experience to make that gap.
That's it.
And this is particularly true in a large enterprise, because they don't necessarily want to, I'll say it in my New York way, piss away money on things that don't have real economic effect to the bottom line next quarter. It goes back to Laura's comment earlier today. So it's an interesting discussion to me.
Yeah, and why most innovation doesn't come out of large companies today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a great segue to our next panel, the enterprise level panel. And again, thank you for this panel, Lisa. Terrific job. Thank you all the panelists. I hope you're going to stick around because we will come back to you later on in the show. But again, thanks for terrific comments and really setting the stage. We have a question from the audience that we'll get to later. And the question is, what are some of the indicators someone should make when you make the jump from intrapreneurship to entrepreneurship? So I'll save that question for our next panel. But again, let's segue over to our enterprise level panel, which is being led by Doug Wilson. Doug is, we've come to know, is a terrific person, great organization that he's created. He's chairman of the CEO Leadership Alliance of Orange County, which is a group of CEOs from some of the county's largest companies working together to build job growth and success across this entire region. Doug himself is a highly successful entrepreneur. He's been CEO of Next Solutions Incorporated since 1990. He's built a number of companies, including Team Site. And again, very, very active in the community. Doug Wilson, welcome, and welcome your panel.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you to all the people on this call today that are making a difference for Orange County's future. We'd like to say in the CEO Leadership Alliance that creating more innovation jobs is one of the most important social impact activities we can be engaged in today. Because without innovation, we give up on our future for Orange County. We become stagnant. Without innovation, we co-opt our talent to others that are beating us in innovation. Without innovation, we do not have the opportunity to lift up the most disadvantaged in our neighborhoods for jobs of the future. So the next century really relies on innovation jobs in Orange County. And the work you all are doing is absolutely critical for that future. And I want to thank you very much. And we all are grateful in the CEO Leadership Alliance for your commitment to helping to drive that. One of the best ways to learn about innovation is through stories. And I have some amazing stories to share with you that will inspire you, will also raise questions. We have a panel of 5 people. We're going to each let them tell a story for 5 to 6 minutes of what they're doing and what they have done. By the way, I will be timekeeper, so don't consider me rude if I interrupt anyone, please. I will, at the end of 30 minutes, turn it over to Scott, who will be curating questions from you in the audience. So if you have a question, please type it in. Scott will be curating those, and we'll ask the panelists the different questions. I'd like to start today with Francis. Francis, welcome. You're on mute right now, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good morning,
Francis
Doug.
Dubé, hello. I can tell you're still in outside of Honolulu. I see your background there. Welcome to California. All right, so Francis is the ex-Edwards Chief Scientific Officer, did some amazing work there. He has now begun some major work in innovation with his new company, Makani. Did I pronounce that right, Francis? Makani?
Yes. Yes, that's correct, Doug.
Perfect. Okay. Francis, I don't need to say much about you, and the work you did at Edwards was incredible. You made a small fortune there, and now you're off on your own. Congratulations. Let's hear your story and what you're up to right now.
Yes, thank you very much, Doug. And just a little clarification, I was the Chief Medical Officer, not the Chief Scientific Officer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Not at all. So since leaving Edwards in 2016, I joined K5 Ventures as a venture capitalist. Through that experience, over the course of about 2.5 years, evaluated close to 70 medical device startup companies. Now, being a physician, having been a veteran of the transcatheter heart valve wars, I felt that I had a unique advantage. We invested in 14 companies, and over the course of the first 1.5 years, 2 years, 11 of them failed, leaving 3 companies. Over the ensuing year, 2 additional ones failed. We have 1 left. That's a failure rate of 92%. And what I got from that experience was, in spite of the advantage I thought I had, the reality was I had no advantage at all, and was essentially aligned with the statistic that 90% of medical device companies fail. But through that experience, identified the 2 major factors of that failure, and they were business execution and basically management. And it was almost irrespective of the technology. So I'll sort of pause there, Doug.
That's really good. Tell us a little bit about what you did, since this is partly about flexing in a COVID environment.
Yeah.
Give us an example of a couple of the startups you've done applying those 2 learnings as well, and how you've assembled a team around you now that can help execute.
Thank you very much, Doug, for that question. And so in response to this, essentially root cause analysis about why medical device companies fail, I formed CoExcel, which is a medical device accelerator. Although the phenotype of COA looks like any other accelerator, its genotype is quite different, in that I pulled together a group of 45 subject matter experts in medical device. So this is across the spectrum of 10 different functional units I would submit to the audience are required for a successful medical device venture. Populated them with people who had 20, 30 years of experience. And so all total, we have close to 1,000 years of medical device experience. We identify technology through area universities or hospitals. We then, through a process, form teams. And so, Doug, what you're alluding to is one of the benefit of this process is that I can form a team to form a company almost literally overnight. And so these teams are small, varying in size between 5 to perhaps 8 or 9 people. In response to COVID in March, I had 4 companies in the CoExcelerator. Everything came to a grinding halt. And this was principally because of the public health emergency announced by the head of Department of Health and Human Services in January 31st to cease clinical trials. And so in medical device, gaining clinical insights is mission critical. All of that activity came to a stop. Now, fortunately, the company that you mentioned, Makani Science, the company that I am the CEO of, is a respiratory sensor company. And so it is the world's first wireless wearable sensor that can monitor not only your respiratory rate, but your depth of breathing. In medicine, we call it ventilation, that we could pivot into the COVID-19 space, where it can serve as a monitor for people afflicted with COVID-19 in an ambulatory setting or in an inpatient setting, actually serve as a tool to triage patients who might need invasive management.
Okay, excellent. I know the audience will have lots of questions for you. What a treasure of resources. And thank you for your humility as well as an entrepreneur, not touting necessarily your successes, but sometimes looking at how you failed, took a cold shower, and came out a stronger person. So congratulations.
Thank you, Doug.
Next up is Bob Wolpert. He is with Golden State Foods. This is a great example of ecosystem innovation, where a company chooses to be a part of something much bigger than just their company. And it requires massive collaboration, trust is the critical element of collaboration. And a willingness to collaborate together means humility, means learning, means opening up to others, means seeking to help others win. And that's what Bob and Golden State Foods have been doing in a big way in this partnership. Bob, I'd like to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Doug. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep.
All right, just to share a few slides. First, to set the stage after that great introduction, my own career has always used technology to create competitive advantage as I ran businesses and have run businesses. The last 12 years, I've been the innovation champion at several businesses. At ITT Corporation, we had 40,000 employees, and I was president of a global division at the same time, was innovation champion for the whole corporation, and worked with teams in China and India and Europe and obviously the US to advance our innovation agenda. The one thing that I think that's changing is in parallel is that the speed of technology, the speed of change in our business models, combined with COVID, is drawing a tremendous attention on the fact that innovation and strategy are getting more closely linked. You know, the time horizon for strategy used to be 3 to 5 years. Innovation is what can you do now? The conversation really needs to be, how are you advancing your innovation agenda as part of your strategy? So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about, and just first start with a little overview of GSF, just to, oops, let's get this thing advanced, just to, in practice run, it ran differently. So let's get the slide there. All right, let's do it the old-fashioned way. You know, very quickly, Golden State Foods is headquartered in Irvine. We have global food production and distribution, primarily to quick serve restaurants. So trucks go into the restaurants for delivery. We're a B2B company. So those of you that are B2C, we're one layer below that. We support B2C companies. We've got a high content of brick and mortar. But we determined that this whole issue about speed and the ability to support our customers was really driving a need to adopt a more formal approach to innovation. We have a long history of being innovative, and we decided to build on that and drive a more consistent dialogue. One of the challenges as you get to the enterprise level is, how do you have the right thematics in your culture? How do you have the right conversations? How do you have the shared vocabulary? And one of the things that I think is deceiving to most is this propensity to think that innovation is the venture capital startup world, and it's not the enterprise world. And the way to bridge that gap in an enterprise is to talk about a continuum. So everything from continuous improvement to disruptive is along a continuum. And as an enterprise, we're welcome to all ideas that fall in that continuum. We picked a catchphrase I've used over the years of think big, start small, and go fast. The idea is to get pilots and experiments moving that people can embrace, and at an affordable level. If they fail, we move on. And as for those of you that are familiar with enterprise of scale, that's kind of culturally counterintuitive. Enterprises work on execution, on reducing variation, not making changes, reducing costs, and innovation is around something new, trying something different. So part of our objective is to teach leaders that the two things need to coexist, that you need to be able to embrace innovation at the same time as you're driving execution. Let me keep going here and talk a little bit about one of the areas I personally helped champion. And I just point out that part of our business is in creation of food, and another part of our business is in the supply chain and logistics that move food and get food to various places. And there are lots of ways to innovate in that space. You see here a diagram of many. One of the messages I tell people is innovation has to create value. An idea is just an idea. Who's going to pay for it? How's it going to drive value? And inside a large corporation, I think that's part of the secret, is to be able to articulate the business case in enough early specificity that you can get enough encouragement and enough funding to proceed. Back in late 2017, we saw a potential intersection between blockchain, IoT, and AI. And knowing our supply chain had some gaps in terms of our visibility, the accuracy of our data, the human element, we decided to run 3 pilots in early 2018. We put about $50,000 each into the pilots. 2 of them advanced to the next phase. One of those pilots actually then proceeded down a multiple path of pilot funding. And now we have several $1 million, multiple $1 million, over 10 million actually, involved in that pilot. I'm just going to tell you briefly about it and then get back to the panel. This pilot is the first in the world that's moving into production of a blockchain platform for food that combines IoT signals for RFID and temperature, traceable from branch to restaurant, through our beef patty production facility, and adding AI to close some of the logic gaps when certain data elements aren't present. When you think of the apps people are creating on their cell phone to drive digital demand, one of the challenges in supply chains is it's not linked. So you could drive demand in one part of the country, and could be a multiple day delay between that and the ability of the supply chain reacting. This ability to see the visibility across nodes of the supply chain of your own ecosystem is incredibly important to link that demand on the demand generation side with the demand fulfillment side. As Doug said, this has an ecosystem play, and I'll explain it in 2 ways. One is in our own ecosystem. So traditionally it's ERP to ERP, one up, one down, and we're creating a system where multiple layers can put their data into the blockchain. As the physical goods move, you get a digital record of that, and where possible you can add the IoT information. And I think the world will become increasingly sensorized and less human input. So this is the backbone for a long-term play. And then in parallel, we were part of the founding group that put together the IBM Food Trust platform. Walmart was the original founding member. So monthly I chair and sit on the board with Walmart, Nestle, Albertsons, and others, 12 of us, that are advancing this for the entire global ecosystem. We're trying to drive adoption, not just for the benefit of the supply chain, but also for the benefit of the consumer. Carrefour, for example, in Europe, largest food retailer, you can scan a mobile app of your case, a QR code on your chicken, and you can see where farm the chicken came from and the path it came. So there's lots of space that this framework creates. And we're very proud that GSF was part of the Orange County community, was able to advance this for the global scale and global good. I'll just come back to questions later and just close with a couple of thoughts. One is speed of change. The COVID's highlighting that. The world is changing. It'll never go slower than it is today. Every week, every month, things evolve more quickly. So think about how innovation is tied to either your strategy, your customer strategy, or the target market that you're addressing, so that you can bring that conversation forward of linking innovation and strategy. Second point is that culture matters, whether it's in your work group, your company, your local business community. And I think here in Orange County, we have a tremendous opportunity to link the conversation around innovation to go to build on the angel and investment venture conversation stream that's going on to the enterprise stream, and be seen as a hub for innovation across the full spectrum. And then lastly, is the point I've already made, is be able to articulate innovation in your enterprise or in your workspace in a very short, succinct way. In our case, we've picked the phrase, think big, start small, and go fast. With that, Doug, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Bob. Think big. What was it again? Think big.
Start small, go fast.
Start small, go fast. Work to remember that. Those are good. Francis acts that way, by the way. Okay. Next up is Ranjit Banerjee. He was with Becton Dickinson for many years, another very large company. He was the president then of CareFusion, which was a $12 billion acquisition by Becton Dickinson in San Diego. And he about doubled the revenues, and he did it through building an innovative platform using artificial intelligence and machine learning. Very intriguing how he led innovation, and he's a corporate guy that did a great job doing it. So I would like to welcome Ranjit, and we have become good friends over the last few months. Welcome, Ranjit.
Thanks, Doug, and very nice to be on this panel. So I'll share a little bit of my experiences, and I'll try to connect it with both the themes of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship as I tell kind of my story. And I'll try to summarize this in the end, hopefully all in 5 minutes. So as Doug said, I was with BD. I've been with BD for a long time. I recently I retired after 25 years, but I was on the East Coast. BD bought CareFusion in 2015, and I was given the opportunity to lead that division. So I jumped on a plane and got here in San Diego, and no going back now. We love it here, but we were a very interesting business. This business was focused on medication management, and what that means is, imagine a 250-bed hospital. That's a typical hospital in the country, in the US. It could be in other parts of the world as well. In a typical 250-bed hospital, something like 6 to 7, maybe even 8,000 medications are ordered by the physicians, checked by the pharmacist, then given to the patient every day. And they follow different routes. Some are oral, injectables, and all kinds of things. And there are something like 30 touch points that happen. And imagine the complexity and the errors, because the errors could lead to patient harm, they could lead to waste, they could lead to all kinds of other complexities. So when I took over the division, the core products were very successful products. We had the infusion pump, which has been around for 25 years. We had the medication dispensing system, or Pyxis. It's a brand leader, also around for about 20 years. So the challenge for my team, my leadership team and myself and others was, how do you innovate on a platform or a set of platforms that have been around for a long time, right? So there's some what we call incremental innovation that always happens. But that incremental innovation is not going to move the needle, right? It's maybe another feature on the pump or another feature on the dispensing station. So what we did was we spent some time truly understanding what are the unmet needs out there when we look at medication management, and not go in with a solution or a widget, but really understand what is not being met. And there was a great discussion in the previous panel around innovation and on, how do you know it's really innovative or not? And to us, it was, what are the needs that are not being met, which are very, very important to be met, right? That's the way we approached it. Some of the things we found were absolutely astounding. I mean, you think of, especially in the US, which is on the cutting edge of healthcare as compared to most of the countries around the world. And I had the vantage point to see healthcare in all parts of the world. Mine was global business. So even in the US, there was some, even with all the technology, EMRs and electronic HIT systems in the hospitals, some of the issues we found were, for instance, there was a tremendous amount of medication waste, right? In a 250-bed hospital, there could be $500,000 of waste. There was, on an average, there's something like 300 phone calls that happen between nursing and pharmacy. The poor nurses are trying to chase up their meds. And nurses, by the way, they are some of the hardest working people in this world, right? You don't want to waste their time doing non-value added activity like chasing the meds, right? You've all heard about the opioid crisis. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of opioids are illegally diverted from healthcare settings, and that fuels the opioid crisis. So this gives you an idea of what are those unmet needs out there and how big are they, right? So that's the first framing, and that's the first prioritization we did. Then we said, okay, what gives us a right to play in this space? And we came up with this, we said, look, we do have these very good products, but they're not connected. So we created and launched a medication management platform, an integrated platform. What we really did was had products talk to each other, share information, convert that data into insights to analytics using AI and other things, and make sure that those actions and insights are given at the right time to the people who are delivering care. So they are given at the right time in the right workflows and as much as possible in an automated manner. And the way to do this is in a large organization is we created a small nimble team. That team was directly reporting to me. For 2 years, they did not have any accountability for revenue. They were only charged with developing and driving this medication management platform. So sometimes you need to get focused. And we launched it, it's been very successful since, and it's given us a tremendous amount of new value creation for our customers because they are now being able to do things that they could not do before. So what are some of the summaries I would say to summarize is you can, when you think of innovating products and platforms which have been around for a long time, I always try to think in terms of how much of innovation runway is there. And to do that, to find that out, you've got to go and understand what are the unmet needs, how big are they, how significant are they, and do we have a right to play in that space or not? Second is you've got to create that sense of urgency and often create an entrepreneurial team. The third is we also decided we can't do everything ourselves. As big as we were, one of the leaders in medical technology, we said we will partner, and we actually acquired 1 or 2 smaller companies. We created some partnerships to help us in the innovation process. Because today, in the complex world we live in today, you cannot do everything yourself, however big you are. And the last thing I would say is you got to be extremely, extremely externally focused. A large organization typically tends to get more internally focused. You've got to be externally focused. Look at what are the disruptive technology, what's happening out there. So several things that can help us here. So I'll stop there, and Doug, I'll hand this back to you.
Thank you so much, Ranjit. Appreciate that. What you just described is you had tools and you were looking for a problem to solve the customer had. And using your tools, they didn't know about those tools necessarily. You applied those tools to solve a problem, and that's where innovation always begins.
Yes, and then one thing I'll say very quick is often when you ask a customer, they will not be able to verbalize their problem succinctly. But when you study it hard enough, you'll be able to verbalize it even better than them, and they can then validate that.
Right, and they don't know the tools you have. So by you having these tools, you bring something they don't even know is an opportunity.
Correct.
That's exactly right. Great, thank you so much. Next up, Alex Marquez. He is with Experian. He is responsible for their venture capital investments, doing a very, very interesting work. We had a wonderful conversation last week. Alex, I'm not sure I see you out there. If you are, please come in.
You guys see me?
Yeah, there you are. Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, tell us a good story, Alex.
Where do I begin? Yeah, I thought I would give you kind of 2 examples of this sort of discussion around intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship in the startup space, because the way we function as a venture group, we're talking about a corporate venture group within a large corporation, a megacorp, right? And so there's 2 different ways I think about it. One is the intrapreneurship. How do we support entrepreneurs internally? And the second part, and I'll get to it afterwards, is how are we investing outside of our sort of core business and enabling a lot of the partners? Internally, I think I would say beginning that in every company I've ever been in, there's always a small, very small subsegment of the employee population who is an entrepreneur at heart, wants to go start a company, right? There's always these group of entrepreneurs internally, but they're part of a large corporation and they have a bunch of ideas they want to go pursue. And I've been approached in every single one of those situations as the venture guy being asked, like, how can we do this internally? Can we fund an internal project? And some of the framework I always give advice is the fact that I think if you're going to be an intrapreneur, funded internally within a large corporation, that I think that individual or that team should be supported, because the worst case scenario is they leave your company and then they go off and start it externally. And so you lose the benefit of that ideism. But the converse to that is they should also take on the similar risk profile of an entrepreneur in a startup, meaning, if it doesn't work out, there is a downside potential to that, but the upside should be there in terms of ownership and the idea. And we talked about this a little bit in the previous panel, how you can leverage, obviously, a lot of the enterprise services and solutions. This actually came to fruition a couple years ago, maybe a little before I joined Experian 4 years ago. We had a former employee, at the time was a current employee, had an idea that he wanted to pursue around mobile data and mobile data analytics and using it for purposes of scoring in emerging markets. Ironically, he was able to pitch it internally. We ended up funding him. He ended up leaving the company, setting up an entirely separate organization where he was the largest shareholder and we were the second largest shareholder, and there was only 2 of us. But over, I think, the 5 or 6 years of time, he'd grown that business quite substantially till recently, in the last 12 months, we acquired the remainder of that business, and now it's a formal P&L internally. And so I think those are great stories. Obviously, it's not going to be a hit success rate in every single time you can do something like that, but I think the fundamental notion here is that supporting intrapreneurs, people internally with their ideas, I think there should be a support framework to do that, as long as it's sort of balanced in a way that the upside and the risks are relevant. The flip side to that is what we do on a daily basis, obviously, which is investing in startups externally. And we've done just over 20 of those and deployed roughly about 200 million in capital globally. What we did notice is going through that process is that, any large corporation, let's call it megacorp like us, right? It's always, a challenge to try to figure out where in the startup life cycle of a company that we want to engage or can engage productively and help them through their journey becoming an early stage company to a growth stage company. And there's different aspects that we bring to the table, right? Obviously, we have a global footprint and a global scale. And so for us to invest in early stage companies is problematic, because if it's a seed stage company, trying to overwhelm them with a lot of resources from a large megacorp tends to be a bit distracted, because they may just be trying to get to an MVP or a proof of concept. And so in that vein, and knowing that seed stage companies don't really need a lot of capital, one of the things I noticed was there's a lot of fintechs, startups at the time, seed-based, coming out of the accelerators, both in the Bay Area and globally, that were building concepts that were taking advantage of our core business, right? Which is the credit bureau or the analytics solutions that we sell. And our mentality internally has always been, well, let's go sell, a $25,000 package to this startup. The problem is, if you're a seed stage company and you have $500,000 or less in startup capital, the last thing you want to be able to do is, or be doing, is spending any of that very precious capital on stuff, right? You're trying to get to an MVP or a POC, right? So the way to flip that around was, let's go ahead and give that data or that capability to the seed stage company for free. And in so doing, what the concept was to remove the paywall, if you will, in the mind of the seed stage company, and enable them with the assets that we have, right? So the data and the services, et cetera, so that they can go innovate and disrupt externally in a vibrant manner, as opposed to worrying about the capital commitment or the payment that they would have to pay us. And so we formally designed this. It's called the Data for Equity program. And the notion I had in my mind was, obviously internally, there's a lot of innovation and disruption we can do, and we can build products. But I would argue, and I think it's fairly trivial, that the external innovation startup ecosystem is orders of magnitude bigger than our internal groups of people. So why not enable and empower those startups to go build and disrupt while they're doing it on our data sets and our analytics? Because I think you get multiple leverage through the assets you provide to that. And of course, if they're successful, then we can invest further or acquire them or however, partner with them at scale. But I think you have to remove that paywall and enable the broader external community to sort of disrupt around you. So that's sort of the 2 examples I would provide from a storytelling perspective. One, obviously, the internal entrepreneurship, and then the last one, obviously, is just trying to figure out where we would play in the startup ecosystem externally and support it. the last comment I made, I think we talked about this, Doug, in the prep session, was I've seen that on a grander scale at my previous job at Intel, Intel being a big global chip manufacturer. We went through a formal process, decades ago, where we had this green and blue badge concept, where blue badge employees, typical, employees full time, if you had an idea and you wanted to get it funded internally, we had a formal program internally, and if it did get funded, much like the process of funding an external entity, you turned in your badge and you became a green badge, which is effectively a contractor. So funded by Intel to go build a product and capability, and they were the sole funders of it. And in those cases, obviously very, very close to the core business. And in multiple of those scenarios, there was acquisitions that subsequently followed, so they became P&L. So I'm a big fan of that model, obviously. I think the balanced risk between entrepreneurs internally who want to go do something, you don't want to lose them, to the external market. You might as well fund them internally.
Those are great examples, Alex, of internal innovation in a big company working and kicking off entrepreneurship. And you know how difficult that is to do. You've been a part of it for years. You know all the barriers. So congratulations. I've watched it and I've seen how often it doesn't succeed. And you're developing a culture more than anything, and the systems and mechanisms to make this happen. It's really a great story. Thank you. Last on our panel is Jessie Yount. She's with the Orange County Business Journal. She's our roamer at large out there in the county, sleuth, spotting things, seeing what's happening. And we'd like to hear from Jessie just what she sees as the trends in Orange County right now around innovation and the trends of what she sees happening as best practice. So Jessie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. So I am the Startups and Innovations reporter, and I also cover healthcare for the Business Journal. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, I have an example of kind of a new venture studio, but I wanted to kind of explore through that some of the changing dynamics in terms of how entrepreneurs and kind of that entrepreneurial spirit can come together. And so, and then get a little bit more into kind of the changing dynamics and trends, as you mentioned, Doug. But I wanted to start with, there's this new venture studio that I've done some reporting on, and it's called Quantum Fund OC. And it's run by two kind of med tech veterans in our community, Dave Ferreira and Bill Colon. And they've both had experience on kind of both sides, being an entrepreneur and then also having exits and joining kind of a bigger corporate company. And they've decided now, so for Dave Ferreira, he joined Bolt USA through an acquisition from one of his companies, and he served there for about 4 years, numerous roles, chief operating officer, chief technology officer. And he left the company in May. He retired, and they launched this fund. And I think the uniqueness of this fund comes from the ideas. They already have about 6 patent pending ideas in their portfolio, and they're coming from their physician-inspired ideas. And so they're going, right to the root of the problems that these physicians have in the operating room, dealing with patients. And so, for example, one of their portfolio ideas is a device that would help with when a patient needs a deep tissue biopsy on the liver, perhaps. The patient tends to, after the biopsy needle is used, there might be a little bit of a bleed. And this is still a problem that's being addressed. And so this portfolio company is developing a device that is a cauterizing device that would be able to be used with the biopsy needle to fix that bleed right away. And I also wanted to mention 2 other kind of points in terms of working with corporates, because of the experience that Dave and Bill Colon have working in both kind of the entrepreneurial side and the corporate side, they're already, you know, talking with, in the medical space, big players like, you know, Medtronic, Stryker, to establish those relationships and see, you know, what they're looking for, especially because a lot of times larger companies, as many of you I'm sure know, they want the R&D done, they want the clinical trials done, they want to have you know, a product that they can immediately start generating revenue with. And so I think you know, by starting with these physician-inspired ideas that are very applicable, and then also you know, collaborating from the beginning with these corporate partners. And then the other element I would add is that they have established a relationship with a manufacturer in Lake Forest. So they have the ability to do everything from prototyping to commercialization of these products. And so the point that I'm getting at here is I think there's a very important role around, you know, accelerators and venture studios and all these different models in terms of bridging the gap and helping entrepreneurs kind of navigate these changing times with the pandemic, because it is changing the way that companies work together. And with that, I don't know if Francis has a second, but I know that something that Francis has been doing with one of his portfolio companies in terms of working with a larger strategic player is something that kind of recently came about with one of his new companies. Francis, I don't know if you'd like to jump in.
Sure, Francis, why don't you take a minute just to explain that? That'd be great. Thank you. And thank you very much, Jesse. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jesse, for that lead in. And I'm been quite a big fan and spectator of quantum because this whole concept, I think, is I think a very responsible one in the current environment that we're in. So the company that Jesse is referring to is Makani Science, our respiratory company. Our basic product, the wireless wearable sensor, was focused principally on monitoring patients that are undergoing conscious sedation procedures. So this is actually a very large market. Many people aren't aware, but postoperative mortality is actually the third most common cause of death in the world after heart disease and stroke. And these cardiorespiratory complications, among the most preventable, are respiratory ones. And they occur in procedures that most of us would consider benign. For example, complex dental procedures, wisdom teeth, impactions, root canals, or they occur in colonoscopy. And I think many on the panel have undergone colonoscopy. And you have an IV put in you, you're put to sleep, and it probably would astonish you to know that you're not monitored from a respiratory standpoint. So that was our original value proposition, and then COVID hit. And with COVID, we were actually approached, fortunately, by a number of governmental agencies, BARDA, Department of Defense, to see whether or not we could pivot our technology to actually monitor patients with COVID, many of whom were at home. Hospitals did not want all of these patients rushing to emergency departments. So they were to connect with their physicians, be monitored at home. Could our monitor serve that purpose? And so the short answer was yes. It allowed us a pivot into this direction. But the other sort of aspect of it had to do with the clinical studies. And so for many 510K devices, not all, about 10 to 15% do require some clinical validation to do. Because of the dictum from the Department of Health and Services that clinical trials be stopped, we were challenged to actually continue our clinical studies. Our product development, however, continued. And so we had devices that we had planned to actually fold into our clinical studies, and now we were on a pause. And so to address Jesse's topic, we too had interfaced with a number of strategic companies that were very, very interested in our product, who actually wanted devices that they could test internally. So we availed ourselves of the opportunity of actually having inventory, commercial devices, research devices that we could then give to the strategics and they could use for their internal due diligence, which we found to be extremely helpful.
That's great. Thank you very much, Francis. Good story again of pivoting, shifting, working through as environments change. Scott, I would like to turn it over to you. And I also see one question that Sue Paternock asked. It's a great question. I would just like to address this. She brought up the question that where does innovation begin? Does it begin with solving a problem, or does it begin with experimentation, creativity? Well, actually, I think it starts in many times with the creativity and experimentation. Where it becomes real is when you found a problem to solve. And that is my distinction. Bell Labs is a good example of that. Bell Labs did amazing basic research. For instance, they developed the first Xerox machine, really. They were the ones that got that going. And then it was built out, but no one knew what to do with it. And finally, the Japanese just started shipping them out and selling them, and they found out, wow, people are actually exchanging paper with this. It's really working in businesses a lot more than we thought. They had a very limited use. Their problem to solve was way too narrow and expanded, and they discovered it, but they did it through experimentation, so they didn't know exactly. So innovation is a messy process. Ultimately, what scales is you found a good problem to solve and many customers that fit that. But I thought it was a great question, Sue. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to, I think it might be, if anyone else wants to elaborate on that, Scott, that'd be more than welcome to invite that. As a matter of fact,
if I could just build on what you said, I see it as not an either or, it's an and also.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And often what happens is there could be a disruptive technology which is sitting in isolation often, but then when you can connect the dots and combine it with something else, it becomes, it could have a disproportionate impact. So at the end of the day, it is about an outcome and an impact and the scale of impact. That is true innovation, one big measure of innovation, but it could happen in any form. And often it's connecting the dots.
That's good. Anyone else on the panel want to comment on that question that Sue asked? Okay, Scott, do you want to ask some questions or comment on some things?
Yeah, I've got some questions, and I want to have David and Elko jump in here as well. I know they've got quite a few questions. When we talk about intrapreneurship, let's talk about what really happens here. Apple, for example, is famous for throwing, particularly under Steve Jobs, was famous for throwing literally hundreds of projects up against the wall and see what would stick. Literally hundreds. What's the panel's opinion of that? I mean, how do you actually do that effectively, in a cost-effective way, in a risk-effective way, in terms of experimenting, in terms of how much effort you throw at projects? And Bob, I know you're a big fan of this, of start small and go fast, fail fast, or learn fast. Well, what's your opinion on that?
That's a great question. I think of it in three buckets. One is the cultural aspect I mentioned. Is it okay to come forward with an idea? Does the culture embrace that possibility? The second is some type, it sounds product management oriented, but some type of funnel process. You have to have a path to get the idea to people that can then adjudicate whether there's funding, et cetera, to be available. But the third, I think, is where a lot of the home runs are in an enterprise, and that's doubling down on your known innovators. You know in your company who has the DNA, who has the stripes, who's been through the war, who did it once, who can do it again. And frequently it's the known innovators that drive the performance. So it's a mix across those three buckets that are going to drive the success inside a corporation.
Yeah, I would add to that. Right, you mentioned Apple, but I think Google's the most famous with encouraging their employees to commit 20% of their time to thinking outside the box and throwing stuff on the wall. I think they have the benefit of having a lot of capital to do that, right? There's a lot of companies that just don't have the capital to go ahead and throw ideas out. So I think, one, it is cultural, right? There's sort of an expectation. I think the idea of innovation, or whatever word you want to use, ideation, is not owned by any one chief innovation officer. I think everybody has ideas, but I think the CIO concept is more about structural framework and setup. And lastly, there has to be sort of a reward system to the point in place, right? You just can't have people wasting their time throwing things around. That being said, having a framework, throwing a reward system, showing some wins are great, right? I think that drives people to think differently. So I think when Google announced that sort of notion years ago, I think it was pretty eye-opening in that regard. But we call it innovation, and most people just call it basic R&D. That's happened for decades. So whatever the tagline is fine with me.
Scott, I would like to ask a question to the panel. And in the first panel, we talked a lot about landmines that can threaten innovation. And it was an interesting discussion, but as an investor, I am very interested in the silver bullets that we have in innovation. And I'm curious if this panel has any silver bullets that they see for the next 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, perhaps I can take a stab at that, Ilka. You always ask the hardest questions, so it's a little unfair this early in the morning. I don't know about just necessarily this environment of COVID that we're all currently living, but just in general, I'm struck by the fact that when we look at medical device innovation, that at least 90% of those companies will fail. And when we look at biotech, pharma, it's closer to 99.9% of those companies fail. And as a physician engineer, we do a root cause analysis to gain a better understanding of those failure modes, per se. And I think we all agree as experienced entrepreneurs, investors, that those failure modes are all around business execution and management. One of the things that I've learned interfacing with a lot of medical device startups is that there's a lot of great ideas out there. There is no shortage of great ideas. What is lacking is that execution piece and the management piece. And so what about that? What are we doing to try to fix that? And so if there is a silver bullet, it is around trying to build a process whereby we can have a bulletproof execution piece. So how do we do that? Well, we can map out what it takes to have a successful medical device venture in terms of all the business functions that are needed. An important element, and perhaps the first element, is the science, having the technical expertise. But after that, number of buckets, all embedded with risk. Any of those risks can tank the company. And so I sort of favor trying to identify a bulletproof process. This is sort of my endeavor in CoExcel to try to bring together and incentivize these individuals who have this expertise to then take these great ideas and to try to execute on them in a way that turns out to be cost effective and actually quite efficient. So I'll stop there, Ilka.
Thank you.
And I'll just build on Franz. I agree completely with what Francis said. I mean, just if you think of it this way, I'll just take the example of my business. It was almost $2.5 billion in revenue. 1% of growth to get it was $25 million. So if you're trying to grow the business every year, you've got to be launching new products every year, right? It becomes a combination of having talented, creative people, for sure, who are domain experts, talented, creative people, surrounded by a very good process that is robust. And the last thing I would say is leadership. It cannot be, innovation has to be owned by the top of the business. Otherwise, it will not work.
Yeah, Rajit, I think I come out of the corporate world as an intrapreneur. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the leadership. So a couple of things. Innovation equals risk. leadership in a public company deals with earnings next quarter. How do you balance the two? And is there a formal product innovation culture, you know, a Magna Carta, so to speak? And number two, doesn't that really lead to the larger companies working with the smaller ones and investing in those smaller ones to balance that risk?
It's a great question. And I'll give you two things we did to answer that. So what we would do was, you know, in a large company, there are typically hundreds of projects going on. What we would do would be to understand what are the top 8 or 10. We would call them needle movers, and we would ring fence them. What does ring fence mean? Ring fence means you cannot take away the funding. You cannot take this. It will have a dedicated core team, a cross-functional dedicated core team, a leader. You ring fence it so that you can't just take away the funding just because your revenue is not meeting the quarterly expectation, because you have to preserve the future, not just the next year, right? Now, you can't ring fence 500 projects, but you can ring fence 10, right? So we would do that. And I think you had a really good question. And I kind of alluded to it at the beginning is, it doesn't matter how big you are today, you've got to be looking outside. So we would be looking through a partnership with startup accelerators. We would be looking at directly contacting startups to see, are they in those strategic adjacencies where it makes sense for us to either do a licensing or an acquisition or a partnership with those startups. So you have to be constantly looking through a process.
Yeah, I would add one comment to what Ranjit said was, you know, my time at Intel, you know, Intel at the time was like 55 or 60 billion in revenue, right? And when ideas would come out around, you know, product lines, what have you, there was always sort of this sort of minimum measurement. If you can't create number one, $1 billion business out of it, why are we going to pursue it? Because it doesn't move the needle.
Yep.
You know, and so that becomes the sort of the big company problem issue, right? And then the process for that is wrapped up in something called ZBB, which is zero-based budgeting. And so all the projects, to Ranjit's point, get ring fenced, and the ones that have the biggest impact kind of make it to the top and get surfaced. But it's a weird thing, a big company problem, right? If you can't get to $1 billion business and be number one or number two in that segment, why are we bothering pursuing it?
Yeah, it's interesting that 3M and a lot of the larger companies, in essence, break themselves up into smaller business groups. So they don't look at it as a $50 billion business. They actually look at it as 300 smaller, you know, $500 million businesses or that. And therefore, the innovation can take place at a lower level. How do we get more companies to actually think differently than thinking they have to come up with $1 billion great idea?
And I think you have to start with the point that you need to have top-down commitment, and that top-down commitment will drive everything. It also means there's got to be a capital amount to go do this. And you know, it's funny, when I was at USAA, I just kind of pointed out, it's an interesting observation, right? So I was at Intel, a pure technology company, and you can look up the R&D spends as a percentage of revenue across tech and, you know, a bunch of others. And then you take that exact same lens and you apply it to the financial services industry. And ironically enough, they're at the bottom of that percentage stack, right? They spend less than 1% on R&D, quote unquote, however you want to describe R&D. And I brought that up in a conversation. So suddenly the executive team like, well, we should just spend more on R&D. We need, you know, $50 million, $100 million budget. But it's just, you know, it's based on industry. Some industries, you know, are just inherently heavy R&D and innovation centric versus other ones. And part of the things there may be the fact that, you know, financial services and healthcare, two of the most heavily regulated industries, right? So, you know, disruption in there is not some trivial direct to consumer app and go disrupt it. It's got all these other risk attributes to it on top of it with regulatory.
Yeah, and to kind of tie into David's point, and his experience is like mine. I come out of large scale enterprises like Nestle and Aramark and companies of that nature. And to all of your points, what the challenge is to build in the entrepreneurial mindset across the entire organization. So each one of you has several thousand internal associates, internal employees. How do you build in an entrepreneurial mindset, and how still keep the structure, to your point, Alex, but also allow enough freedom of ideation across the entire organization? Bob, I know you've done a lot of work in that area too.
Well, the point I made about innovation is a continuum, and it starts with whether you call it old-fashioned Six Sigma. Today we call it continuous improvement, so that somebody that's even an hourly worker on the floor can be part of a work group that drives an idea and takes change. If you can have that as part of your culture, then it's not so foreign for somebody to have an idea. Now, the challenge is if you have an idea and your direct boss is a blocker, then your idea is trapped. So one of the themes in a large corporation is, do you have escape mechanisms to get ideas to be reviewed and discussed? And we're not perfect, we're working on that, but that's a key opportunity to find paths for the good ideas to see the light of day.
Yep.
If I could jump in. I'm sorry,
yeah,
go ahead, Reggie.
Just to answer your question, a couple of other thoughts as well. You know, if you look at 10, 15 years ago, for a large corporation, there was always this feeling of what I call a status quo, right? I mean, we could go along and you know, we are so big, and I think it's a very interesting thought. But today, I would argue there's no such thing as status quo. It doesn't matter how big you are.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a very important point to understand, that you could get disrupted at any point in time. So you've got to be, and it's not always about growth. It's always also about, okay, what else is out there? And the second to me is also very interesting, and Doug knows my passion on this one, is how do you convert innovation into this concept of shared value, where if you can instill in the organization that you're doing good for society by doing so, you're doing good for the business, it's an amazing effect, synergistic effect. You get a lot of ideas. Now, it's a little easier in healthcare, I would say, but it's very powerful if you can create the shared value concept.
Since we're sharing stories, I'd like to just share one in that my background is unique in that at Edwards Life Sciences, we began almost as an entrepreneurial startup company. In 2002, when I first interfaced with the company, we had spun out of a much larger entity, Baxter, about 2 years previous. We had a cash cow, which is the prosthetic heart valve. It was a great product, but clearly the growth rates were not impressive. In 2002, we did the first presentation of the transcatheter heart valve. At the time, it was a cloak and dagger project. We codenamed it the Patriot Project. Since our main constituency were heart surgeons, we brought together 20 of the top heart surgeons in the world into a room and did a dog and pony show for them. At the end of that, 18 of these surgeons gave it a thumbs down and said we should kill the project. Only 2 of them felt that it had any promise whatsoever. Now, this sort of goes to David's question earlier about disruptive technology and how does that come about. I would add that disruptive technology occurs when someone is willing to stick their neck out. Because in spite of having 18 of the top surgeons saying kill the project, our CEO, Mike Musalem, said, no, we're going forward. And I think what we see time and time again in companies that have become very successful based on disruptive technology is an individual who, against all odds, decided to go forward in spite of everything that he was hearing. Now, transcatheter heart valves, of course, is the overnight success, 20 years in the making, at $4.5 billion of revenue, the most successful cardiovascular device in the world, in the history of medicine. The challenge for Edwards now is how do we now bridge that gap, now that Edwards is a huge company, and continue that legacy of innovation. The comments that everyone has made on this panel is quite cogent. Who's going to stick their neck out in this setting to give us the next transcatheter heart valve? So I think that is a major challenge as companies get larger and have to deal with this process, which makes these decision-making very, very complex.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to kind of end a segment, Francis. And that's just a terrific comment, because you're also touching on what we've also talked about even before the current crisis, and that is the risk of a larger company being blindsided by a more nimble competitor that's emerging. So the larger we get, the more myopic we get, the more overly structured sometimes. And so we are allowed someone to come from behind. Doug, this was an excellent panel. Thank you so much for helping us assemble it. Panelists, terrific comments. Please stay with us, stick with us. We're going to come back to you here shortly. But again, Doug, great job. Thanks again. Thanks for being such a great partner.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Scott.
It's a great job. But let me bring up Lawrence Wilk. We've been looking forward to Larry's closing comments here, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for all the speakers to address your questions. Let me just give you a little quick background about Larry Wilk, and it's quite extensive. Larry is an adjunct professor. He's the co-leader of the new Masters in Innovation and Entrepreneurship program at the Mirage School of Business. He has been a consultant to the Irvine Company, Warner Home Video. He's a long-term vice president of operations and strategy for Walt Disney Studios. Very extensive work there. He teaches now entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. So I've asked Larry to come in today, and we're having him really kind of pull all this together for us in terms of potential strategies to move forward. Larry, welcome.
Thank you. Share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay.
Excellent.
So I've been listening last 3 hours. Fascinating. I've been adjusting the presentation as we've been talking, trying to capture some frameworks we use to teach, a little bit of research, and applying some structure. But I support everything that people have talked about. Let me start with a quote that I heard reinforced yesterday. Basically, Andy Grove saying bad companies are destroyed by crisis, good companies survive, and great companies are improved by that. So here's a Gartner study recently, which sort of reflects that idea. Yesterday, I heard Brian Chesky from Airbnb talk about their business and what they've gone through. So at the start of the pandemic, they lost 80% of the business. So they thought about how to respond. So very quickly, they cut $1 billion in marketing spend. They then decided they needed to lay off 25% of their workforce. But then they also, in a 72-hour period, went out and borrowed or raised $2 billion to ensure they'd have adequate cash flow for the recover stage. They also looked at their hosts and saw the $1 billion in cancellation of reservations they had, and actually sent them $250 million to make up for some of their lost reservations. So that was kind of their response. But then as they looked to recover, they saw their business start to shift. And instead of their customers going to exotic locations in Europe and staying in big cities, they were starting to go within 200 miles, looking to drive to national parks and small towns where they could get away, and even in some cases where they could work from home. So pretty quickly what they saw is they're now the #1 renter of RVs and cabins, and even mentioned yurts. So people are going outdoors. They're renting more rooms outside of large cities where they aren't even competing with hotels. So now, as of July, their business has fully recovered to last year's numbers, and they've planned their IPO. So they're able to respond very quickly. This next slide is some research that Imran Khurram just released with Harvard Working Knowledge, and it goes to Ranjit's comment that the status quo is no longer an option. For a company to react, you either have to modify your product or look at new markets. We also have some products, industry rising demand, like Walmart, I think almost doubled their sales year over year. And then obviously a lot of industries with falling demand. So it forces you to think about new businesses. So there's the age-old question, what's better, an existing company or a startup when you're looking at new businesses and new markups? So we've talked a lot about the last 3 hours, that the advantages of large companies. Obviously, the infrastructure and the brand to get traction for the idea, their relationships with partners. Think about developing vaccines. It's harder for a startup to really have that experience with regulators, to have the knowledge and even the expertise to do patents. And then once they have the idea, to execute at scale. We also know from this research that large companies have a 1 in 8 chance of being successful. So still the risk, as people have talked about, are much different than a startup, which has like a 1 in 500 chance. But all is not good. Startups, so big companies can't be like startups. So as we've talked, very often you have a business model and a market share to defend. That Marriott couldn't go into the room rental business without destroying their hotel model. You have shareholders and employees dependent on your existing revenue stream. So Hoag Hospital would have difficulty shifting to a telehealth or a prepaid model, and it just disrupts their current method of operating. Same thing, think about Hoag if all of a sudden when they said, without the crisis, you can't come to our hospitals anymore, we're going to do everything via telephone. There are also a lot of regulations that affect companies. So like PayPal, when it first started, was an unregulated bank. Well, Bank of America couldn't do the same thing that PayPal did because it would disrupt their entire business. Let me give a local example. So Forward is a healthcare provider that has a local location at Fashion Island. And it's a unique model in that for $149 a month, you get unlimited access to your doctor. You get 24/7 visit, chat support, telehealth support with nurse practitioners. They have remote monitoring of your health. And it's just a whole different model. It's all supported by platform and artificial intelligence tied in with genetic testing. So Forward is able to compete with health in different ways, and they have no market share to defend. The employees of Forward don't have an expectation. The doctors that they hire expect to do things in a different way. Customers of Forward don't expect the same level of care, but on the flip side, those customers also, I can do at 2 o'clock in the morning, say, hey, I've woken up with 104 fever, what do you recommend? So it's a little different model. However, COVID now changes everything. Companies are no longer comfortable to just defend their market share. So they are being disrupted. Your shareholders and employees now know that you have to do new things. So think about Disney releasing Mulan on Disney Plus. They bypassed what might have been $1 billion theatrical market globally to now help drive subscriptions to Disney Plus, or apparel manufacturers who are going to mask and PPE just to bring in some incremental revenue. Or also think about a company being worried about breaking laws or regulations. Well, the government's been very flexible in making changes. So outdoor dining, throughout Orange County, or FDA quick approvals just for like the speed evaluation tests that just came out. As far as risk and reputation, again, you're giving companies a benefit of the doubt right now. So how do you organize your company for innovation? So let's talk about, we talked right at the start, Scott talked right at the start, is where do you get your ideas? And this depends on companies. Sometimes you have a dedicated R&D team. So Samsung spends like $13 billion a year on R&D. Or you may ask each division to come up with their own ideas. We'll talk about partnerships. How do you partner with other companies or with startups or individuals to drive ideas, or get innovation by merging and acquiring with other companies. But here's a way to think about open innovation inside your corporation. So a lot of companies start with what we call the opportunistic model. Opportunistic model is a couple guys get an idea, they work on it nights and weekends, they get it to the point of having a minimum viable product, they take it to their boss, he gives them some money, and it just sort of happens organically. Given that success, companies will then say, hey, we'd like to encourage innovation throughout the whole company. So they go to the enabler model. And in the enabler model, as we talked about with Google and its 20%, you enable the whole company to come up with innovative ideas. You have training and processes to then surface those ideas to get approval and additional funding. Now, sometimes the ideas are very complex, so you instead go to the advocate model. And in the advocate model, you hire some experts in new technology and business development who come up with ideas, and then they bring those ideas to the business unit to actually develop and scale. And in the last model, the producer model, a company says, we want to be in new businesses, we're going to create or acquire a company, and they'll be responsible in this new space. So let me give you an example of the enabler model. So Adobe hired Scott Randall as their VP of creativity. Scott was a serial entrepreneur, and he put this simple Adobe Kickbox process, which they've now trained hundreds of people at Adobe on a process to come up with ideas. By the way, Adobe Kickbox has now been spun off into a nonprofit, and it's available to anyone under the Kickbox which includes all the methodology, all the materials, and training materials if you're interested. So the opportunity, let me give you a couple more examples. So I got my start at Disney as an intern working on the Disney stores, writing the business plan. That idea came from Steve Burke, who surveyed a couple employees. They said you should open a store, and Steve came up with the idea and brought it to the CEO, which gave him funding. We've just talked about the enabler model. In the advocate model, Samsung has product innovation teams around the world. They come up with ideas that they then take to marketing and operations to commercialize. And lastly, you have the producer model, where Google has spun off. You have Google X coming up with some of their moonshot ideas. Or when you think about their overall alphabet reorganization, the idea is to separate the core business from the new ideas, and so that they can have proper metrics and incentives and staffing to handle both sides of the business. So how do we ignite innovation in your company? So now you're saying we need to come up with new ideas. So there are a couple models. We talked about how do you partner? And so again, a lot of different thoughts here, but first one, kind of crowdsourcing and challenges. So it could be inside the company. You could also work with external stakeholders. And again, the key here is have a methodology using that enabler model and coaches to help the entire organization come up with new ideas. Or hackathons. Hackathons are very popular, but they're outside now just the technical realm. And you can use hackathons to come up with new business ideas. We've talked a lot today about incubators and accelerators. And again, it's a great way to get diversity of thought, to learn where businesses are going, and to potentially find new talent to bring in. Or you outsource that innovation or co-create. When I was at Disney, a number of times I partnered with vendors to develop new products, which we then ended up purchasing from them based on success. We've also talked a little bit about corporate venture capital, which allows the startup to get access to expertise, customers, and commercialization, and the company in return gets access to this knowledge and new ideas. All right, so a couple examples. So Cisco took Adobe Kickbox and they created the Innovate Everywhere Challenge based on that framework and got over 50% of their company working on these new ideas. What they were trying to prevent is, prior to this initiative, if someone got an idea in Cisco and it didn't get traction, they would leave, start up their own company, and then Cisco would buy them at a very high premium. Procter & Gamble, they realized they hadn't developed a new successful product in 17 years. So AG Lafley said, I want to get 50% of our ideas from the outside. And he developed Connect and Develop. So Connect and Develop is a way that they can connect with their suppliers, with universities, with scientists, and even retired scientists. They provide the challenge, and then they have a platform and a methodology to then evaluate those ideas. And when they commercialize something, they share the revenue with the person who had the idea. Talk about hackathons. So Steve Blank at Stanford has started this, it's called Hacking for Recovery. These are 5-day classes where they come up with new startups and new ideas tied to COVID-19. They're in there, I think their 5th session now, and they've, I think, about 150 teams participate. They're using a hackathon, but in 5 days to come up with new ideas. There are also corporate accelerators. Here's an example of Black & Veatch, which, again, they've partnered with Ignite X, which is a platform and a provider of the expertise on an accelerator, and Black & Veatch provides the subject matter expertise and some of the funding, helping these companies commercialize faster. Or Qualcomm out of San Diego has a small business accelerator. The purpose here is to help small businesses who've lost income from from COVID, recover using Qualcomm's expertise. All right, so now you do all these engagement models and you come up with an idea. How do you develop it? And this is where we see real opportunities for companies to operate in the lean startup mode, operating like a startup. This is exactly what we did with Disney stores. There were 4 of us that started at the first year and opened the first 3 stores. Eventually, we got it up to 750 stores and over $1 billion, but it started with lean startup methodology and a very founder-based kind of mentality. So we recommend, and I teach in the entrepreneurship class, using the business model canvas for evaluating the assumptions in your corporate startup. But what we've done a little differently, we take the typical questions that you ask in the business model canvas and apply that with a corporate new venture. So again, the value proposition, is this something that's temporary or permanent? Am I serving existing customers or going after new customers? Again, think of Airbnb going after people that rent RVs. How are we going to manage customer relationships? Again, think about Disney going from a theatrical model to Disney Plus, which is direct to consumer. When we think about the business design parts of the business model canvas, again, what are the key activities, but what activities are new to the company? And what resources can we leverage, or what resources can we reallocate? So back to Airbnb, they've reallocated a lot of their resources to these new growing businesses. And then lastly, what partnerships can they leverage to get speed instead of trying to do everything yourself? The last part of the business model, the financial model. So as we look at revenue streams, are we cannibalizing our current revenue? But also, are there things that we can do to qualify us for government supplements or grants? From a cost structure, are we willing to accept lower margins? Do we have sunk costs that we should still try these ideas, even though the margins will be lower? Again, as we talk about lean startup being agile, I think customers are willing to let you try things. So products are being released now and companies are adjusting as they get the feedback. And by the way, these slides will be available. I know I'm going quick. I'm trying to get an 8-hour presentation in 20 minutes. So you're welcome to have these slides when we're done. So here's another one. Now that you have the idea, iterating, the benefit the company has is they have access to customers, to suppliers, to funders, to the expertise inside their company to really find out what will work and to do some quick trials. So in conclusion, the best thing we ever did in Disney, and this was a huge shift, before when you came up with an idea, the response from your boss, from the legal team, from finance was no, because. Then we got new leadership in, and the new leadership changed that approach and they said, I like your idea if you can do the following. You can do this if you don't lose track of your current job. You can do the following if you get a test customer. You can do the following if you get this approval. And this made a huge change in the company. And with that, I'll give it back to Scott.
Can't hear anything.
We go.
Yep.
Can we have, Larry, thanks again. That was a great summary for today. Can I have all our panelists come back on, put their videos back on, and we'll do some final Q&As, final comments here. Well, all of you will come back on, put your video back on. Elko, join us. David, Garrett, Dina, come on back in. Okay, so here's the one question. We're going to move to a close here. But the key question now is we're seeing entire sectors being hammered. If you're in the airline business, if you're in the hospitality business, if you're in the casino business, if you're in the cruise business, you're being decimated right now in this crisis. Why is this, of all times, the best time to innovate, grow, create new value propositions? Why is this such a stellar time to be doing all this activity? I'll let anybody take.
I'll give you a quick sort of like a reverent answer. What else can you possibly do? You're cooped up in your home and you have all this time. You're not traveling back and forth from meeting to meeting. So you might as well be able to communicate and work with other people. You have time to actually think. But the reality is, without the irreverence, I think a lot of opportunity comes out of problems, and a lot of the new, as pointed out before, a lot of companies that have become household name, cachet name companies came out of times of depression or of change. We have precipitating factors. COVID has changed the way we're going to do telehealth or health in the future. It's going to change the way we look at diagnostics. It's going to change the way we do business. It's going to change the retail environment. We heard this from Laura. We heard this from, the two panels. We heard this from Larry. So I think, there are a lot of contributing factors to enable change to take place.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Others, why?
Yeah, this is Alex. I had a comment.
Yeah,
I think the benefit here is the fact that you had a cleansing happening in the last 6 months, right? I would joke that any monkey could have made money in the last 12 years because the stock market has gone in only one direction, which is up, right? So this whole notion that some of the best companies have been started during these difficult times, I think that's a little disingenuous because I think good companies are always started at every single time. I think what this current environment did, obviously in 2008 and 2000, same cycle happens, it exposes the weak ones that have zero durability and sustainability. Venture capital has been used so much times in these direct-to-consumer plays where you're buying customers. There's zero durability, sustainability in those business models. So the benefit I see is that it exposes the weakness in all these sort of capital by customer business models. I think that to me, I think the most important thing to come out of this COVID time, and I don't put any best companies come out of the worst environments. I think the bar is now higher, been raised to prove the sustainability and viability of the business.
Other comments?
I'll just add briefly to kind of echo what Alex was saying. Just from my perspective, yeah, I completely agree with what he was saying. I think that there are still a lot of great companies that were able to manage their money well and continue innovating, and the ones that couldn't make it more than a month or two, you know, I think their problems existed before COVID. And from my perspective, I mean, there's never been more to write about in terms of innovation. So great.
Yeah, we're looking forward to your articles too, by the way, Jesse, thank you. But Alex, I think you're spot on. I mean, you saw in March, yeah, people that were literally just weeks, they were right on the precipice. So, yeah.
And we've seen it internationally, right? So we have an international portfolio, and we talk about the distress in the North America market, but you got to remember the government stepped in with $2 trillion in a backup PPP project, right? Our companies in India and Southeast Asia did not have that government backstop. So the weakness was really exposed in those markets. You didn't have the benefit of government backstop. And I just want to give a shout out to Larry. Thank you for putting an Andy Grove quote in there, personal mentor of mine. So I appreciate that.
That was really, really good analysis there, Larry. Just go to Bob for just a moment. Bob, talking about fast pivots too, McDonald's has done some very significant things in short term with, say, drive-through, moving out of the restaurant into drive-through, and just a phenomenal turnaround just in a matter of a few weeks. Can you kind of speak to that for a moment?
Sure. You know, for the 8 years that I've watched McDonald's as a close customer, this is my time at Golden State Foods, give you an example. They couldn't get out of their own way to have a simplified menu. The 1,400 restaurants, 14,000 restaurants in the U.S., everybody has a different opinion. Finally, COVID comes along, drive-through speed matters, and a simplified menu is necessary for success. Now there's an abundance of conversation about keeping the simplified menu post-COVID because it clarified what the consumer really wants to purchase. It helps speed of drive-through, and it'll ultimately drive, you know, recurrence of in-store sales. But I think they're a shining example. Chick-fil-A has done the same thing with drive-through, and you'll see now Chipotle is coming down online with drive-through and curbside as well. So, I mean, one image I thought of, I'll just throw out to the group. We all think fancy, high-tech engineering, innovation. Think about the restaurant that put a tent up in the parking lot. That's innovation. I mean, this business change is going to, where does that go in the wintertime? What's coming post-COVID when people can start to travel? Will we see a surge of new types of business activity that driven by demands that most people can't anticipate? So I think there's the story's unwritten on what's post-COVID and what leading indicators there are that will come post-COVID.
Yeah, I think that's a great demand, a great comment. And, you know, even things like a fall off in demand for sweatpants, for example, we'll start to see that. So yeah, that's a great comment. Some great pivots happening very, very quickly. Elko, you had a great question we hadn't gotten to, and Alex and others have mentioned this. It is starting at the top, starting entrepreneurship at the top. What role, if any, does the board of directors play? For those of you who are leading these major companies, how do you engage your board of directors, or do you? What's been your experience there?
Is that for me or for Elko?
That could be any of you. Yeah.
I mean, I'll take a second.
Question is from Elko.
Oh, it's from. Can't answer your own question, Elko. Yeah, at least you know, from the top down, as I mentioned, it's critical, and it's been mentioned across the conversations today. Our board, by default, they did approve the venture program, and so I think if you don't have it from top down, it's hard to get, you know, full buy-in and support. I think there was a question on the side panel. You know, how do you address some of those folks internally who would be blockers to you know, some of the internal innovation disruption? The way we challenged that was the regional CEO simply made every region, gave them an action item or hurdle. They had to go do so many venture investments, and they had to show traction on those investments. So they couldn't just push back and say, we're not going to support. They were actually required to support a certain number of deals and a certain number of commercial partnerships. So they made it part of their bogey metric for success for the year.
No, that's a great technique. Any others?
If I can add
Yeah,
to
please.
that.
Yeah.
Over the years, watched interfacing with boards of directors, I think one of the great mistakes is constantly beating the same message to the board that this is going to work, this is going to work. You have to have projects that can pivot to find small successes and feed those small successes to the board to keep them engaged and believing. If it's a big bang theory and just trust me, more money, it's going to work, you're going to get drift and disbelief. So that would be my advice at Watchpoint for board interaction.
Yep. That's a great way of kind of spoon feeding them the successes. Garrett, others that are on the Lisa, when you look at it, say from a emerging company or emerging concept, to what point are you engaging your advisory board or your mentors or others that are supporting you in terms of moving this forward?
If you've been lucky enough to put together a good group, you should view them as an accelerant, as the potential gas, maybe not gasoline for the fire, but something, some kindling at least, that to make the introductions, to help you look for things that you didn't know you were supposed to look for, to hopefully help you avoid learning lessons the hard way, that sort of thing. I think that's something that, not every entrepreneur is lucky enough to build the right group, and something that, probably should be thought about earlier on, because it really can be an accelerant.
And I think it's also important for entrepreneurs to really be open and, understand that even though they're great people and they have a fantastic idea, they have blind spots. And so be open to receiving, feedback and input on those blind spots, because it's, you can always be improving. So anybody who thinks, that they know everything already is doomed for failure, obviously. But the sooner you engage, I would, it's never too soon to engage any kind of advisor or coaching for your project or your company. Never too soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And with everyone we've had on this show today that are parts of the innovation ecosystem, hopefully you've made some new connections that you can leverage as we move forward. I mean, that's part of the benefit of this session and our subsequent sessions. Larry, let me just put you on the spot for a moment. Since we were talking about large companies and being able to move, what is your comment on Disney right now? How have they done in the past 3 to 4 months? Are they succeeding, or are you? Alex talks a lot about structure and culture. Is it enabling them or hindering them at this point?
Yeah, I think Disney is doing a great job. And Bob Chapek is a new CEO. There was just an article that said Bob Chapek is cutting the sacred cows at Disney. So we've always relied on cable bundle, and Disney Plus is going to affect the cable bundle in the US, but he's also starting to pull Disney content around the world from those bundle providers so they can help go direct to consumer. So he's walking away from a lot of business looking towards the future. Now, as far as theme parks, you can't put a theme park online, but as far as digital business, he's definitely disrupting a lot of core revenue that they get.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch, and that's my take on it as well in terms of how well they're doing. So let me go to David and Elko. Do you have any kind of final questions or closing comments here?
I have a question that I would ask to Larry. And Larry, you look at innovation from so many different ways, but also you work with people from so many different age groups. And do you see any difference in how millennials innovate compared to maybe baby boomers?
Well, that's a good question. Well, let me say the most successful entrepreneurs are in the 45 to 54 age range. So that the idea that it's all 22-year-olds right out of college. So I think the level of maturity that baby boomers have gives them some advantages. On the flip side, I worked with 44 MIE students, and they were not fearful about coming up with crazy ideas, which over the course of 9 months, we then validated or discarded, but they were much more willing to come up with a crazy idea. Beyond that, the only other thing is the environmental issues, social issues were also very much a part of the ideas that they came up with. They didn't want to do something that would harm the environment. So we talked circular economy and local sourcing, things that maybe a corporation or baby boomer would be less concerned with.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the things that I look for in a conference, and I don't know if it's the same of everyone who participates, either as a panelist or as a viewer, to try to come up with 3 or 4 good ideas and walk away with those to apply in either in your business, be that as an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, just as a business person. And I honestly couldn't come up with only 4. As I looked and I was recording all this stuff, and I'll write it up, but it's going to be a little longer than I had thought. The main themes that come out though are pretty evident. Number one, and all the panelists and all the speakers have come up with basically the same. You retreat or you innovate. Status quo is not a solution. You have to have a very fundamental perspective on how you want to grow. Otherwise, somebody is going to, catch you and outdo you or deposition you. And like Andy Grove said, when you look at that, Alex, only the paranoid survive. And I think that's what I call keeping your head on a swivel, making sure you understand what's happening in the newness of the social structure, the economics, the technology, the regulatory environment. And certainly COVID has changed the way we look at it. We heard from Laura Kane that digital lifestyles and more appetite for bringing manufacturing back to the United States is going to be important, and new opportunities in automation, digital tools, and robots, specific areas, AI, AR, big data, cloud, 5G, and even cyber. We talked about the trends in fintech and in healthcare and in ag tech. As the millennials come in, they have a different attitude than the boomers. So, next generation is going to be changing the way we look at innovation, be it incremental innovation, which stems from a problem today, or disruptive innovation, where there may be no solution right now, but that's where maybe the next generation of the next FANG type companies, come from. And then we heard about, the entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, the characteristics of successful people. It all starts with making sure that there's senior level support, a CEO, making sure you have the resources. And as Dina said, valuing the diversity of differences, not in color, not in ethnicity, but in perspectives and the backgrounds and the experiences you have. And then we heard on the other side, some really good ideas in terms of making sure you can put innovation into the larger enterprise. We look at, venture arms, we look at integrating with accelerators, contests, hackathons, partnering with small companies, because that's really the ideal in my mind, when the entrepreneurs have the opportunity to look at a strategic from, maybe it's Edwards, maybe it's Google, maybe it's somebody else, and then they build that relationship, and then they get taken out by the larger company. And then I thought Larry did a great job. One of the things that I was smiling when he put up the product market matrix, or the Ansoff matrix. I think that's a really great way for everybody to be able to look at their business. Look at where you are today in the products and the markets. Look for expansion of your products into new markets. Look at your markets, what new products you can provide. And you do that in a variety of ways, looking internally by setting up product innovation charters, having the CEO make sure that it's safe for the innovators to participate, and then making sure you kind of ignite innovation and ignite invention in a variety of ways. I just thought that was a great summation. And, I walked away with 9 pages of comments to myself that I have to now pursue. you know, I thought it was great. You guys did a superb job, and I'm impressed. And hopefully the audience and the participants also took away a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I've got to echo that. Thank you, David. Just a terrific job on part of all of our presenters, all of our panelists today. Again, the benefit of this was connecting you as well. So for those of you viewing this, please connect with our presenters. Get involved with the Orange County Innovation Ecosystem. There are a lot of parts to it, and they're very, very, very effective, whether you're here in Orange County or you're broader than that. So my 15-second close is this. This has been recorded. It will be posted, and then so you'll be able to see this as well as excerpts from the event. This is a series, so we'll look forward to a partnership with Tech Coast Angels, with David Elko and the entire team as we move forward here, because we've just scratched the surface this morning. But we'll look forward to seeing you all in the future. And again, thank you all for your time, and have a great, successful rest of the summer and going into the fall. Thanks again for everyone.